Section 1 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. April 8th. My dearest Barbara Alexeyevna, how happy I was last night! How immeasurably, how impossibly happy! That was because for once in your life you had relented so far as to obey my wishes. At about 8 o'clock I awoke from sleep. You know, my beloved one, that I always like to sleep for a short hour after my work is done. I awoke, I say, and lighting a candle, prepared my paper to write and trimmed my pen. Then, suddenly, for some reason or another, I raised my eyes and felt my very heart leap within me. For you had understood what I wanted. You had understood what my heart was craving for. Yes, I perceived that a corner of the curtain in your window had been looped up and fastened to the cornice as I had suggested should be done, and it seemed to me that your dear face was glimmering at the window, and that you were looking at me from out of the darkness of your room, and that you were thinking of me. Yet how vexed I felt that I could not distinguish your sweet face clearly, for there was a time when you and I could see one another without any difficulty at all. Ah me! But old age is not always a blessing, my beloved one. At this very moment everything is standing awry to my eyes, for a man needs only to work late overnight in his writing of something or other for, in the morning, his eyes to be red, and the tears to be gushing from them in a way that makes him ashamed to be seen before strangers. However, I was able to picture to myself your beaming smile, my angel, your kind, bright smile, and in my heart there lurked just such a feeling as on the occasion when I first kissed you, my little Barbara. Do you remember that, my darling? Yet somehow you seemed to be threatening me with your tiny finger. Oh, was it so, little wanton? You must write and tell me about it in your next letter. But what think you of the plan of the curtain, Barbara? It is a charming one, is it not? No matter whether I be at work, or about to retire to rest, or just awaking from sleep, it enables me to know that you are thinking of me and remembering me, that you are both well and happy. Then, when you lower the curtain, it means that it is time that I, Makar Alexeyevitch, should go to bed. And when again you raise the curtain, it means that you are saying to me, "Good morning," and asking me how I am, and whether I have slept well. As for myself, adds the curtain, I am altogether in good health and spirit. Glory be to God! Yes, my heart's delight. You see how easy a plan it was to devise, and how much writing it will save us. It is a clever plan, is it not? And it was my own invention, too. Am I not cunning in such matters, Barbara Alexeyevna? Well, next let me tell you, dearest, that last night I slept better and more soundly than I had ever hoped to do, and that I am the more delighted at the fact in that, as you know, I had just settled into a new lodging, a circumstance only too apt to keep one from sleeping. This morning, too, I arose, joyous and full of love, at cockcrow. How good seemed everything at that hour, my darling! When I opened my window, I could see the sun shining, and hear the birds singing, and smell the air laden with scents of spring. In short, all nature was awaking to life again, Everything was in consonance with my mood. Everything seemed fair and springlike. Moreover, I had a fancy that I should fare well today, but my whole thoughts were bent upon you. Surely, thought I, we mortals who dwell in pain and sorrow might, with reason, envy the birds of heaven, which know not either. And my other thoughts were similar to these. In short, I gave myself up to fantastic comparisons. A little book which I have says the same kind of thing in a variety of ways. For instance, it says that one may have many, many fancies, my Barbara; that as soon as the spring comes on, one's thoughts become uniformly pleasant and sportive and witty, for the reason that at that season the mind inclines readily to tenderness, and the world takes on a more roseate hue. From that little book of mine I have culled the following passage, and written it down for you to see. In particular does the author express a longing similar to my own, where he writes: "Why am I not a bird, free to seek its quest?" And he has written much else, God bless him! But tell me, my love, where did you go for your walk this morning? Even before I had started for the office, you had taken flight from your room, and passed through the courtyard. Yes, looking as vernal like as a bird in spring. What rapture it gave me to see you! Ah, little Barbara, little Barbara! You must never give way to grief, for tears are of no avail, nor sorrow. I know this well. I know it of my own experience. So do you rest quietly until you have regained your health a little. But how is our good Thedora? What a kind heart she has! You write that she is now living with you, and that you are satisfied with what she does. True, you say that she is inclined to grumble, but do not mind that, Barbara. God bless her, for she is an excellent soul. But what sort of an abode have I lighted upon, Barbara Alexievna? What sort of a tenement do you think is this? Formerly, as you know, I used to live in absolute stillness, so much so that if a fly took wing it could plainly be heard buzzing. Here, however, all is turmoil and shouting and clatter. The plan of the tenement you know already. Imagine a long corridor quite dark and by no means clean. To the right a dead wall, and to the left a row of doors, stretching as far as the line of rooms extends. These rooms are tenanted by different people, by one, by two, or by three lodgers, as the case may be. But in this arrangement there is no sort of system, and the place is a perfect Noah's Ark. Most of the lodgers are respectable, educated, and even bookish people. In particular, they include a chinovnik, one of the literary staff in some government department, who is so well read that he can expound Homer or any other author, in fact anything. Such a man of talent is he. Also, there are a couple of officers for ever playing cards, a midshipman, and an English tutor. But to amuse you, dearest, let me describe these people more categorically in my next letter, and tell you in detail about their lives. As for our landlady, she is a dirty little old woman who always walks about in a dressing gown and slippers, and never ceases to shout at Teresa. I myself live in the kitchen, or rather in a small room which forms part of the kitchen. The latter is a very large, bright, clean, cheerful apartment with three windows in it, and a partition wall which, running outwards from the front wall, makes a sort of little den, a sort of extra room for myself. Everything in this den is comfortable and convenient, and I have, as I say, a window to myself. So much for a description of my dwelling place. Do not think, dearest, that in all this there is any hidden intention. The fact that I live in the kitchen merely means that I live behind the partition wall in that apartment, that I live quite alone, and spend my time in a quiet fashion, compounded of trifles. For furniture, I have provided myself with a bed, a table, a chest of drawers, and 2 small chairs. Also, I have suspended an icon. True, better rooms may exist in the world than this, much better rooms, yet comfort is the chief thing. In fact, I have made all my arrangements for comfort's sake alone, so do not for a moment imagine that I had any other end in view. And since your window happens to be just opposite to mine, and since the courtyard between us is narrow, and I can see you as you pass, why, the result is that this miserable wretch will be able to live at once more happily and with less outlay. The dearest room in this house costs, with board, 35 roubles, more than my purse could well afford, whereas my room costs only 24, though formerly I used to pay 30, and so had to deny myself many things. I could drink tea but seldom, and never could indulge in tea and sugar as I do now. But somehow I do not like having to go without tea, for everyone else here is respectable, and the fact makes me ashamed. After all, one drinks tea largely to please one's fellow men, Barbara, and to give oneself tone and an air of gentility, though, of myself, I care little about such things, for I am not a man of the finicking sort. Yet think you that when all things needful, boots and the rest, have been paid for, much will remain? Yet I ought not to grumble at my salary. I am quite satisfied with it. It is sufficient. It has sufficed me now for some years, and in addition I receive certain gratuities. Well, goodbye, my darling. I have bought you 2 little pots of geraniums, quite cheap little pots too, as a present. Perhaps you would also like some mignonette? Mignonette it shall be, if only you will write to inform me of everything in detail. Also, do not misunderstand the fact that I have taken this room, my dearest. Convenience and nothing else has made me do so. The snugness of the place has caught my fancy. Also, I shall be able to save money here, and to hoard it against the future. Already I have saved a little money as a beginning. Nor must you despise me because I am such an insignificant old fellow that a fly could break me with its wing. True, I am not a swashbuckler, but perhaps there may also abide in me the spirit which should pertain to every man who is at once resigned and sure of himself. Goodbye, then, again, my angel. I have now covered close upon a whole 2 sheets of notepaper, though I ought long ago to have been starting for the office. I kiss your hands, and remain ever your devoted slave, your faithful friend, Makar Dievushkin. P.S. One thing I beg of you above all things, and that is that you will answer this letter as fully as possible. With the letter I send you a packet of bonbons. Eat them for your health's sake, nor for the love of God feel any uneasiness about me. Once more, dearest one, goodbye. End of section 1.
Section 2 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. April 8th. My beloved Makar Alexievitch, do you know, must quarrel with you. Yes, good Makar Alexievitch, I really cannot accept your presents, for I know what they must have cost you. I know to what privations and self-denial they must have led. How many times have I not told you that I stand in need of nothing, of absolutely nothing, as well as that I shall never be in a position to recompense you for all the kindly acts with which you have loaded me. Why, for instance, have you sent me geraniums? A little sprig of balsam would not have mattered so much, but geraniums? Only have I to let fall an unguarded word, for example about geraniums, and at once you buy me some. How much they must have cost you! Yet, what a charm there is in them, with their flaming petals! Wherever did you get these beautiful plants? I have set them in my window as the most conspicuous place possible, while on the floor I have placed a bench for my other flowers to stand on, since you are good enough to enrich me with such presents. Unfortunately, Thedora, who with her sweeping and polishing makes a perfect sanctuary of my room, is not over pleased at the arrangement. But why have you sent me also bonbons? Your letter tells me that something special is afoot with you, for I find in it so much about paradise and spring and sweet odors and the song of birds. Surely, thought I to myself when I received it, this is as good as poetry. Indeed, verses are the only thing that your letter lacks, Makar Alexievitch. And what tender feelings I can read in it! What roseate coloured fancies! To the curtain, however, I had never given a thought. The fact is that when I moved the flower pots, it looped itself up. There now. Ah, Makar Alexievitch, you neither speak of nor give any account of what you have spent upon me. You hope thereby to deceive me, to make it seem as though the cost always falls upon you alone, and that there is nothing to conceal. Yet I know that for my sake you deny yourself necessaries. For instance, what has made you go and take the room which you have done, where you will be worried and disturbed, and where you have neither elbow space nor comfort? You who love solitude, and never like to have any one near you. To judge from your salary, I should think that you might well live in greater ease than that. Also, Thedora tells me that your circumstances used to be much more affluent than they are at present. Do you wish then to persuade me that your whole existence has been passed in loneliness and want and gloom, with never a cheering word to help you, nor a seat in a friend's chimney corner? Ah, kind comrade, how my heart aches for you! But do not overtask your health, Makar Alexievitch. For instance, you say that your eyes are over weak for you to go on writing in your office by candlelight. Then why do so? I am sure that your official superiors do not need to be convinced of your diligence. Once more, I implore you not to waste so much money upon me. I know how much you love me, but I also know that you are not rich. This morning I too rose in good spirits. Thedora had long been at work, and it was time that I too should bestir myself. Indeed, I was yearning to do so, so I went out for some silk, and then sat down to my labours. All the morning I felt light-hearted and cheerful, yet now my thoughts are once more dark and sad. Once more my heart is ready to sink. Ah, what is going to become of me? What will be my fate? To have to be so uncertain as to the future, to have to be unable to foretell what is going to happen, distresses me deeply. Even to look back at the past is horrible, for it contains sorrow that breaks my very heart at the thought of it. Yes, a whole century in tears could I spend because of the wicked people who have wrecked my life. But dusk is coming on, and I must set to work again. Much else should I have liked to write to you, but time is lacking, and I must hasten. Of course, to write this letter is a pleasure enough, and could never be wearisome. But why do you not come to see me in person? Why do you not, Makar Alexievitch? You live so close to me, and at least some of your time is your own. I pray you, come. I have just seen Teresa. She was looking so ill, and I felt so sorry for her that I gave her 20 kopecks. I am almost falling asleep. Write to me in fullest detail both concerning your mode of life, and concerning the people who live with you, and concerning how you fare with them. I should so like to know. Yes, you must write again. Tonight I have purposely looped the curtain up. Go to bed early, for last night I saw your candle burning until nearly midnight. Goodbye. I am now feeling sad and weary. Ah, that I should have to spend such days as this one has been. Again, goodbye. Your friend, Barbara Dobrosolova. End of section 2.
Section 3 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. April 8th. My dearest Barbara Alexievna, to think that a day like this should have fallen to my miserable lot. Surely you are making fun of an old man. However, it was my own fault entirely. One ought not to grow old holding a lock of Cupid's hair in one's hand. Naturally one is misunderstood. Yet man is sometimes a very strange being. By all the saints, he will talk of doing things, yet leave them undone, and remain looking the kind of fool from whom may the Lord preserve us. Nay, I am not angry, my beloved. I am only vexed to think that I should have written to you in such stupid, flowery phraseology. Today I went hopping and skipping to the office, for my heart was under your influence, and my soul was keeping holiday, as it were. Yes, everything seemed to be going well with me. Then I betook myself to my work. But with what result? I gazed around at the old familiar objects, at the old familiar grey and gloomy objects. They looked just the same as before. Yet were those the same inkstains, the same tables and chairs that I had hitherto known? Yes, they were the same, exactly the same. So why should I have gone off riding on Pegasus' back? Whence had that mood arisen? It had arisen from the fact that a certain sun had beamed upon me and turned the sky to blue. But why so? Why is it sometimes that sweet odours seem to be blowing through a courtyard, while nothing of the sort can be? They must be born of my foolish fancy, for a man may stray so far into sentiment as to forget his immediate surroundings, and to give way to the superfluity of fond ardour with which his heart is charged. On the other hand, as I walked home from the office at nightfall, my feet seemed to lag, and my head to be aching. Also, a cold wind seemed to be blowing down my back. Enraptured with the spring, I had gone out, clad only in a thin overcoat. Yet you have misunderstood my sentiments, dearest. They are altogether different to what you suppose. It is a purely paternal feeling that I have for you. I stand towards you in the position of a relative who is bound to watch over your lonely orphanhood. This I say in all sincerity, and with a single purpose, as any kinsman might do. For, after all, I am a distant kinsman of yours. The seventh drop of water in the pudding, as the proverb has it. Yet still a kinsman, and at the present time your nearest relative and protector, seeing that where you had the right to look for help and protection, you found only treachery and insult. As for poetry, I may say that I consider it unbecoming for a man of my years to devote his faculties to the making of verses. Poetry is rubbish. Even boys at school ought to be whipped for writing it. Why do you write thus about comfort and peace and the rest? I am not a fastidious man. or one who requires much. Never in my life have I been so comfortable as now. Why, then, should I complain in my old age? I have enough to eat. I am well dressed and booted. Also, I have my diversions. You see, I am not of noble blood. My father himself was not a gentleman. He and his family had to live even more plainly than I do. Nor am I a milksop. Nevertheless, to speak frankly, I do not like my present abode so much as I used to like my old one. Somehow the latter seemed more cosy, dearest. Of course, this room is a good one enough. In fact, in some respects, it is the more cheerful and interesting of the two. I have nothing to say against it, no. Yet I miss the room that used to be so familiar to me. Old lodgers, like myself, soon grow as attached to our chattels as to a kinsman. My old room was such a snug little place. True, its walls resembled those of any other room. I am not speaking of that. The point is that the recollection of them seems to haunt my mind with sadness. Curious that recollections should be so mournful. Even what in that room used to vex me and inconvenience me now looms in a purified light, and figures in my imagination as a thing to be desired. We used to live there so quietly, I and an old landlady who is now dead. How my heart aches to remember her, for she was a good woman, and never overcharged for her rooms. Her whole time was spent in making patchwork quilts with knitting needles that were an ashin (L) long. Oftentimes we shared the same candle and board. Also, she had a granddaughter, Masha, a girl who was then a mere baby, but must now be a girl of 13. This little piece of mischief, how she used to make us laugh the day long! We lived together, a happy family of 3. Often, of a long winter's evening, we would first have tea at the big round table, and then betake ourselves to our work, the while that, to amuse the child, and to keep her out of mischief, the old lady would set herself to tell stories. Oh, what stories they were! Those stories less suitable for a child than for a grown up, educated person. My word! Why, I myself have sat listening to them as I smoked my pipe, until I have forgotten about work altogether. And then, as the story grew grimmer, the little child, our little bag of mischief, would grow thoughtful in proportion, and clasp her rosy cheeks in her tiny hands, and, hiding her face, press closer to the old landlady. Ah, how I loved to see her at those moments! As one gazed at her, one would fail to notice how the candle was flickering, or how the storm was swishing the snow about the courtyard. Yes, that was a goodly life, my Barbara, and we lived it for nearly 20 years. How my tongue does carry me away! Maybe the subject does not interest you, and I myself find it a not over easy subject to recall, especially at the present time. Darkness is falling, and Teresa is busying herself with something or another. My head and my back are aching, and even my thoughts seem to be in pain, so strangely do they occur. Yes, my heart is sad today, Barbara. What is it you have written to me? Why do you not come in person to see me? Oh, dear one, what would people say? I should have but to cross the courtyard for people to begin noticing us and asking themselves questions. Gossip and scandal would arise, and there would be read into the affair quite another meaning than the real one. No, little angel, it were better that I should see you tomorrow at vespers. That will be the better plan, and less hurtful to us both. Nor must you chide me, beloved, because I have written you a letter like this. Reading it through, I see it to be all odds and ends. for I am an old man now, dear Barbara, and an uneducated one. Little learning had I in my youth, and things refused to fix themselves in my brain when I tried to learn them anew. No, I am not skilled in letter writing, Barbara, and without being told so, or anyone laughing at me for it, I know that, whenever I try to describe anything with more than ordinary distinctness, I fall into the mistake of talking sheer rubbish. I saw you at your window today. Yes, I saw you as you were drawing down the blind. Goodbye, little Barbara, and may God keep you. Goodbye, my own Barbara Alexievna. Your sincere friend, Makar. P.S. Do not think that I could write to you in a satirical vein, for I am too old to show my teeth to no purpose, and people would laugh at me, and quote our Russian proverb, "Who diggeth a pit for another one, the same shall fall into it himself." End of section 3.
Section 4 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. April 9th. My dearest Makar Alexievitch, are not you, my friend and benefactor, just a little ashamed to repine and give way to such despondency? And surely you are not offended with me? Ah, though often thoughtless in my speech, I never should have imagined that you would take my word as a jest at your expense. Rest assured that never should I make sport of your years or of your character. Only my own levity is at fault. Still more, the fact that I am so weary of life. What will such a feeling not engender? To tell you the truth, I had supposed that you were jesting in your letter, wherefore my heart was feeling heavy at the thought that you could feel so displeased with me. Kind comrade and helper, you will be doing me an injustice if for a single moment you ever suspect that I am lacking in feeling or in gratitude toward you. My heart, believe me, is able to appraise at its true worth all that you have done for me by protecting me from my enemies, and from hatred and persecution. Never shall I cease to pray to God for you, and should my prayers ever reach him and be received of heaven, then assuredly fortune will smile upon you. Today I am not well. By turns I shiver and flush with heat, and Thedora is greatly disturbed about me. Do not scruple to come and see me, Makar Alexievitch. How can it concern other people what you do? You and I are well enough acquainted with each other, and one's own affairs are one's own affairs. Goodbye, Makar Alexievitch, for I have come to the end of all I had to say, and am feeling too unwell to write more. Again, I beg of you not to be angry with me, but to rest assured of my constant respect and attachment. Your humble, devoted servant, Barbara Dobroslova. End of section 4.
Section 5 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. April 12th. Dearest Mistress Barbara Alexievna, I pray you, my beloved, to tell me what ails you. Every one of your letters fills me with alarm. On the other hand, in every letter I urge you to be more careful of yourself, and to wrap up yourself warmly, and to avoid going out in bad weather, and to be in all things prudent. Yet you go and disobey me. Ah, little angel, you are a perfect child. I know well that you are as weak as a blade of grass, and that, No matter what wind blows upon you, you are ready to fade. But you must be careful of yourself, dearest. You must look after yourself better. You must avoid all risks, lest you plunge your friends into desolation and despair. Dearest, you also express a wish to learn the details of my daily life and surroundings. That wish I hasten to satisfy. Let me begin at the beginning, since, by doing so, I shall explain things more systematically. In the first place, on entering this house, one passes into a very bare hall, and thence along a passage to a mean staircase. The reception room, however, is bright, clean, and spacious, and is lined with redwood and metalwork. But the scullery you would not care to see. It is greasy, dirty, and odoriferous, while the stairs are in rags, and the walls so covered with filth that the hand sticks fast wherever it touches them. Also, on each landing there is a medley of boxes, chairs, and dilapidated wardrobes, while the windows have had most of their panes shattered, and everywhere stand washtubs filled with dirt, litter, eggshells, and fish bladders. The smell is abominable. In short, the house is not a nice one. As to the disposition of the rooms, I have described it to you already. True, they are convenient enough, yet every one of them has an atmosphere. I do not mean that they smell badly, so much as that each of them seems to contain something which gives forth a rank, sickly sweet odour. At first, the impression is an unpleasant one, but a couple of minutes will suffice to dissipate it, for the reason that everything here smells: people's clothes, hands, and everything else, and one grows accustomed to the rankness. Canaries, however, soon die in this house. A naval officer here has just bought his fifth. Birds cannot live long in such an air. Every morning, when fish or beef is being cooked, and washing and scrubbing are in progress, the house is filled with steam. Always, too, the kitchen is full of linen hanging out to dry, and since my room adjoins that apartment, the smell from the clothes causes me not a little annoyance. However, one can grow used to anything. From earliest dawn, the house is astir as its inmates rise, walk about, and stamp their feet. That is to say, every one who has to go to work then gets out of bed. First of all, tea is partaken of. Most of the tea urns belong to the landlady, and since there are not very many of them, we have to wait our turn. Anyone who fails to do so will find his teapot emptied and put away. On the first occasion, that was what happened to myself. Well, is there anything else to tell you? Already I have made the acquaintance of the company here. The naval officer took the initiative in calling upon me, and his frankness was such that he told me all about his father, his mother, his sister, who was married to a lawyer of Tula, and the town of Kronstadt. Also, he promised me his patronage, and asked me to come and take tea with him. I kept the appointment in a room where card playing is continually in progress, and after tea had been drunk, efforts were made to induce me to gamble. Whether or not my refusal seemed to the company ridiculous I cannot say, but at all events my companions played the whole evening, and were playing when I left. The dust and smoke in the room made my eyes ache. I declined, as I say, to play cards, and was therefore requested to discourse on philosophy, after which no one spoke to me at all, a result which I did not regret. In fact, I have no intention of going there again, since every one is for gambling, and for nothing but gambling. Even the literary tchinovnik gives such parties in his room, though, in his case, everything is done delicately and with a certain refinement, so that the thing has something of a retiring and innocent air. In passing, I may tell you that our landlady is not a nice woman. In fact, she is a regular beldam. You have seen her once, so what do you think of her? She is as lanky as a plucked chicken in consumption, and with Phaldoni, her servant, constitutes the entire staff of the establishment. Whether or not Phaldoni has any other name I do not know, but at least he answers to this one, and every one calls him by it. A red-haired, swine-jowled, snub-nosed, crooked lout, he is for ever wrangling with Teresa, until the pair nearly come to blows. In short, life is not overly pleasant in this place. Never at any time is the household wholly at rest, for always there are people sitting up to play cards. Sometimes, too, certain things are done of which it would be shameful for me to speak. In particular, hardened though I am, it astonishes me that men with families should care to live in this Sodom. For example, there is a family of poor folk who have rented from the landlady a room which does not adjoin the other rooms, but is set apart in a corner by itself. Yet what quiet people they are! Not a sound is to be heard from them. The father, he is called Gorshkov, is a little grey-headed tchinovnik who, 7 years ago, was dismissed from public service, and now walks about in a coat so dirty and ragged that it hurts one to see it. Indeed, it is a worse coat even than mine. Also, he is so thin and frail at times I meet him in the corridor that his knees quake under him, his hands and head are tremulous with some disease, God only knows what, and he so fears and distrusts everybody that he always walks alone. Reserved though I myself am, he is even worse. As for his family, it consists of a wife and 3 children. The eldest of the latter, a boy, is as frail as his father, while the mother, a woman who formerly must have been good-looking, and still has a striking aspect in spite of her pallor, goes about in the sorriest of rags. Also, I have heard that they are in debt to our landlady, as well as that she is not overly kind to them. Moreover, I have heard that Gorshkov lost his post through some unpleasantness or other, through a legal suit or process, of which I could not exactly tell you the nature. Yes, they certainly are poor. Oh, my God, how poor! At the same time, never a sound comes from their room. It is as though not a soul were living in it. Never does one hear even the children, which is an unusual thing, seeing that children are ever ready to sport and play, and if they fail to do so it is a bad sign. One evening, when I chanced to be passing the door of their room, and all was quiet in the house, I heard through the door a sob, and then a whisper, and then another sob, as though somebody within were weeping, and with such subdued bitterness that it tore my heart to hear the sound. In fact, the thought of these poor people never left me all night, and quite prevented me from sleeping. Well, goodbye, my little Barbara, my little friend beyond price. I have described to you everything to the best of my ability. All today you have been in my thoughts. All today my heart has been yearning for you. I happen to know, dearest one, that you lack a warm cloak. To me, too, these St. Petersburg springs with their winds and their snow showers, spell death. Good heavens, how the breezes bite one! Oh, do not be angry, beloved, that I should write like this. Style I have not. Would that I had! I write just what wanders into my brain, in the hope that I may cheer you up a little. Of course, had I had a good education, things might have been different, but as things were, I could not have one. Never did I learn even to do simple sums. Your faithful and unchangeable friend, Makar Dievushkin. End of section 5.
Section 6 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. April 25th. My dearest Makar Alexievitch, today I met my cousin, Sasha. To see her going to wreck and ruin shocked me terribly. Moreover, it has reached me, through a side wind, that she has been making inquiry for me, and dogging my footsteps, under the pretext that she wishes to pardon me, to forget the past, and to renew our acquaintance. Well, among other things she told me that, whereas you are not a kinsman of mine, that she is my nearest relative; that you have no right whatever to enter into family relations with us, and that it is wrong and shameful for me to be living upon your earnings and charity. Also, she said that I must have forgotten all that she did for me, though thereby she saved both myself and my mother from starvation, and gave us food and drink; that for 2½ years we caused her great loss, and, above all things, that she excused us what we owed her. Even my poor mother she did not spare. Would that she, my dead parent, could know how I am being treated! But God knows all about it. Also, Anna declared that it was solely through my own fault that my fortunes declined after she had bettered them; that she is in no way responsible for what then happened; and that I have but myself to blame for having been either unable nor unwilling to defend my honor. Great God! Who then has been at fault? According to Anna, Господин Buikov was only right when he declined to marry a woman who— But need I say it? It is cruel to hear such lies as hers. What is to become of me I do not know. I tremble and sob and weep. Indeed, even to write this letter has cost me 2 hours. At least it might have been thought that Anna would have confessed her share in the past. Yet see what she says. For the love of God, do not be anxious about me, my friend, my only benefactor. Thedora is over apt to exaggerate matters. I am not really ill. I have merely caught a little cold. I caught it last night while I was walking to Bolkova to hear mass sung for my mother. Ah, mother, my poor mother! Could you but rise from the grave and learn what is being done to your daughter. B. D. End of section 6.
Section 7 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. May 20th. My dearest little Barbara, I am sending you a few grapes which are good for a convalescent person and strongly recommended by doctors for the allayment of fever. Also, you were saying the other day that you would like some roses, wherefore I now send you a bunch. Are you at all able to eat, my darling? For that is the chief point which ought to be seen to. Let us thank God that the past and all its unhappiness are gone. Yes, let us give thanks to heaven for that much. As for books, I cannot get hold of any, except for a book which, written in excellent style, is, I believe, to be had here. At all events, People keep praising it very much, and I have begged the loan of it for myself. Should you too like to read it? In this respect, indeed, I feel nervous, for the reason that it is so difficult to define what your taste in books may be, despite my knowledge of your character. Probably you would like poetry, the poetry of sentiment and of love-making. Well, I will send you a book of my own poems. Already I have copied out part of the manuscript. Everything with me is going well, so pray do not be anxious on my account, beloved. What Thedora told you about me was sheer rubbish. Tell her from me that she has not been speaking the truth. Yes, do not fail to give this mischief maker my message. It is not the case that I have gone and sold a new uniform. Why should I do so, seeing that I have 40 roubles of salary still to come to me? Do not be uneasy, my darling. Thedora is a vindictive woman, merely a vindictive woman. We shall yet see better days. Only do you get well, my angel, only do you get well for the love of God, lest you grieve an old man. Also, who told you that I was looking thin? Slanders again, nothing but slanders. I am as healthy as could be, and have grown so fat that I am ashamed to be so sleek of paunch. Would that you were equally healthy. Oh, now goodbye, my angel. I kiss every one of your tiny fingers, and remain ever your constant friend, Makar Dievushkin. P.S. But what is this, dearest one, that you have written to me? Why do you place me upon such a pedestal? Moreover, how could I come and visit you frequently? How, I repeat? Of course, I might avail myself of the cover of night, but, alas, the season of the year is what it is, and includes no night time to speak of. In fact, although throughout your illness and delirium I scarcely left your side for a moment, I cannot think how I contrived to do the many things that I did. Later I ceased to visit you at all, for the reason that people were beginning to notice things and to ask me questions. Yet, even so, a scandal has arisen. Teresa I trust thoroughly, for she is not a talkative woman, but consider how it will be when the truth comes out in its entirety. What then will folk not say and think? Nevertheless, be of good cheer, my beloved, and regain your health. When you have done so, we will contrive to arrange a rendezvous out of doors. End of section 7.
Section 8 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 1st. My beloved Makar Alexievitch, so eager am I to do something that will please and divert you in return for your care, for your ceaseless efforts on my behalf, in short, for your love for me, that I have decided to beguile a leisure hour for you by delving into my locker and extracting thence the manuscript which I sent you herewith. I began it during the happier period of my life, and have continued it at intervals since. So often have you asked me about my former existence, about my mother, about Pokrovsky, about my sojourn with Anna Thedorovna, about my more recent misfortunes. So often have you expressed an earnest desire to read the manuscript in which, God knows why, I have recorded certain incidents of my life, that I feel no doubt but that the sending of it will give you sincere pleasure. Yet somehow I feel depressed when I read it, for I seem now to have grown twice as old as I was when I penned its concluding lines. Ah, Makar Alexievitch, how weary I am! How this insomnia tortures me! Convalescence is indeed a hard thing to bear. B. D. End of section 8. Section 9 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 1st, Addendum 1. Up to the age of 14, when my father died, my childhood was the happiest period of my life. It began very far away from here, in the depth of the province of Tula, where my father filled the position of steward on the vast estates of the Prince P. Our house was situated in one of the prince's villages, and we lived a quiet, obscure, but happy life. A gay little child was I, my one idea being ceaselessly to run about the fields and the woods and the garden. No one ever gave me a thought, for my father was always occupied with business affairs, and my mother with her housekeeping. Nor did any one ever give me any lessons, a circumstance for which I was not sorry. At earliest dawn I would hie me to a pond or a copse, or to a hay or a harvest field, where the sun could warm me, and I could roam wherever I liked, and scratch my hands with bushes, and tear my clothes in pieces. For this I used to get blamed afterwards, but I did not care. Had it befallen me never to quit that village, had it befallen me to remain forever in that spot, I should always have been happy. But fate ordained that I should leave my birthplace even before my girlhood had come to an end. In short, I was only 12 years old when we removed to St. Petersburg. Ah, how it hurts me to recall the mournful gatherings before our departure, and to recall how bitterly I wept when the time came for us to say farewell to all that I had held so dear. I remember throwing myself upon my father's neck, and beseeching him with tears to stay in the country a little longer, but he bid me be silent, and my mother, adding her tears to mine, explained that business matters compelled us to go. As a matter of fact, old Prince P had just died, and his heirs had dismissed my father from his post. Whereupon, since he had a little money privately invested in St. Petersburg, he bethought him that his personal presence in the capital was necessary for the due management of his affairs. It was my mother who told me this. Consequently, we settled here, in St. Petersburg, and did not again move until my father died. How difficult I found it to grow accustomed to my new life! At the time of our removal to St. Petersburg, it was autumn, a season when, in the country, the weather is clear and keen and bright, all agricultural labour has come to an end, the great sheaves of corn are safely garnered in the byre, and the birds are flying hither and thither in clamorous flocks. Yes, at that season the country is joyous and fair, but here, in St. Petersburg, at the time when we reached the city, we encountered nothing but rain, bitter autumn frosts, dull skies, ugliness, and crowds of strangers who looked hostile, discontented, and disposed to take offence. However, we managed to settle down, though I remember that in our new home there was much noise and confusion as we set the establishment in order. After this my father was seldom at home, and my mother had few spare moments, wherefore I found myself forgotten. The first morning after our arrival, when I awoke from sleep, how sad I felt! I could see that our windows looked out upon a drab space of wall, and that the street below was littered with filth. Passers-by were few, and as they walked they kept muffling themselves up against the cold. Then there ensued days when dullness and depression reigned supreme. Scarcely a relative or an acquaintance did we possess in St. Petersburg, and even Anna Thedorovna and my father had come to loggerheads with one another, owing to the fact that he owed her money. In fact, our only visitors were business callers, and as a rule these came but to wrangle, to argue, and to raise a disturbance. Such visits would make my father look very discontented and seem out of temper. For hours and hours he would pace the room with a frown on his face and a brooding silence on his lips. Even my mother did not dare address him at these times, while, for my own part, I used to sit reading quietly and humbly in a corner, not venturing to make a movement of any sort. 3 months after our arrival in St. Petersburg, I was sent to a boarding school. Here I found myself thrown among strange people. Here everything was grim and uninviting, with teachers continually shouting at me, and my fellow pupils forever holding me up to derision, and myself constantly feeling awkward and uncouth. How strict, how exacting was the system! appointed hours for everything, a common table, ever insistent teachers. These things simply worried and tortured me. Never from the first could I sleep, but used to weep many a chill, weary night away. In the evenings, every one would have to repeat or to learn her lessons. As I crouched over a dialogue or a vocabulary, without daring even to stir, how my thoughts would turn to the chimney corner at home, to my father, to my mother, to my old nurse, to the tales which the latter had been used to tell. How sad it all was! The memory of the merest trifle at home would please me, and I would think and think how nice things used to be at home. Once more I would be sitting in our little parlour at tea with my parents, in the familiar little parlour where everything was snug and warm. How ardently, how convulsively I would seem to be embracing my mother. Thus I would ponder, until at length tears of sorrow would softly gush forth and choke my bosom, and drive the lessons out of my head. For I could never master the tasks of the morrow. No matter how much my mistress and fellow pupils might gird at me, no matter how much I might repeat my lessons over and over to myself, knowledge never came with the morning. Consequently, I used to be ordered the kneeling punishment, and given only one meal in the day. How dull and dispirited I used to feel! From the first my fellow pupils used to tease and deride and mock me whenever I was saying my lessons. Also, they used to pinch me as we were on our way to dinner or tea, and to make groundless complaints of me to the headmistress. On the other hand, how heavenly it seemed when, on Saturday evening, my old nurse arrived to fetch me! How I would embrace the old woman in transports of joy! After dressing me and wrapping me up, she would find that she could scarcely keep pace with me on the way home. So full was I of chatter and tales about one thing and another. Then, when I had arrived home merry and light-hearted, how fervently I would embrace my parents, as though I had not seen them for 10 years. Such a fussing would there be, such a talking and a telling of tales. To every one I would run with a greeting, and laugh and giggle, and scamper about, and skip for very joy. True, my father and I used to have grave conversations about lessons and teachers, and the French language and grammar. Yet we were all very happy and contented together. Even now it thrills me to think of those moments. For my father's sake I tried hard to learn my lessons, for I could see that he was spending his last kopeck upon me, and himself subsisting God knows how. Every day he grew more morose and discontented and irritable. Every day his character kept changing for the worse. He had suffered an influx of debts, nor were his business affairs prospering. As for my mother, she was afraid even to say a word, or to weep aloud, for fear of still further angering him. Gradually she sickened, grew thinner and thinner, and became taken with a painful cough. Whenever I reached home from school, I would find every one low-spirited, and my mother shedding silent tears, and my father raging. Bickering and high words would arise, during which my father was wont to declare that, though he no longer derived the smallest pleasure or relaxation from life, and had spent his last coin upon my education, I had not yet mastered the French language. In short, everything began to go wrong, to turn to unhappiness. And for that circumstance my father took vengeance upon myself and my mother. How he could treat my poor mother so I cannot understand. It used to rend my heart to see her, so hollow were her cheeks becoming, so sunken her eyes, so hectic her face. But it was chiefly around myself that the disputes raged. Though beginning only with some trifle, they would soon go on to God knows what. Frequently even I myself did not know to what they related. Anything and everything would enter into them, for my father would say that I was an utter dunce at the French language, that the headmistress of my school was a stupid, common sort of woman who cared nothing for morals, that he, my father, had not yet succeeded in obtaining another post, that Lamont's grammar was a wretched book, even a worse one than Zapolsky's, that a great deal of money had been squandered upon me, that it was clear that I was wasting my time in repeating dialogues and vocabularies, that I alone was at fault, and that I must answer for everything. Yet this did not arise from any want of love for me on the part of my father, but rather from the fact that he was incapable of putting himself in my own and my mother's place. It came of a defect of character. All these cares and worries and disappointments tortured my poor father until he became moody and distrustful. Next he began to neglect his health, with the result that, catching a chill, he died, after a short illness, so suddenly and unexpectedly that for a few days we were almost beside ourselves with the shock. My mother, in particular, lying for a while in such a state of torpor that I had fears for her reason. The instant my father was dead, creditors seemed to spring up out of the ground, and to assail us en masse. Everything that we possessed had to be surrendered to them, including a little house which my father had bought 6 months after our arrival in St. Petersburg. How matters were finally settled I do not know, but we found ourselves roofless, shelterless, and without a copper. My mother was grievously ill, and of means of subsistence we had none. Before us there loomed only ruin, sheer ruin. At the time I was 14 years old. Soon afterwards Anna Thedorovna came to see us, saying that she was a lady of property and our relative, and this my mother confirmed, though, true, she added that Anna was only a very distant relative. Anna had never taken the least notice of us during my father's lifetime, yet now she entered our presence with tears in her eyes, and an assurance that she meant to better our fortunes. Having condoled with us on our loss and destitute position, she added that my father had been to blame for everything, in that he had lived beyond his means, and taken upon himself more than he was able to perform. Also, she expressed a wish to draw closer to us, and to forget old scores. And when my mother explained that, for her own part, she harbored no resentment against Anna, the latter burst into tears, and hurrying my mother away to church, then and there ordered mass to be said for the dear departed, as she called my father. In this manner she effected a solemn reconciliation with my mother. Next, after long negotiations and vacillations, coupled with much vivid description of our destitute position, our desolation, and our helplessness, Anna invited us to pay her, as she expressed it, a return visit. For this my mother duly thanked her, and considered the invitation for a while, after which, seeing that there was nothing else to be done, she informed Anna Thedorovna that she was prepared, gratefully, to accept her offer. Ah, how I remember the morning when we removed to Vassilievsky Island! It was a clear, dry, frosty morning in autumn. My mother could not restrain her tears, and I too felt depressed. Nay, my very heart seemed to be breaking under a strange, undefined load of sorrow. How terrible it all seemed! End of section 9. Section 10 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 1st, Addendum 2, Part 1. At first, that is to say until my mother and myself grew used to our new abode, we found living at Anna Thedorovna's both strange and disagreeable. The house was her own, and contained 5 rooms, 3 of which she shared with my orphaned cousin, Sasha, whom she had brought up from babyhood. A 4th was occupied by my mother and myself, and the 5th was rented of Anna by a poor student named Pokrovsky. Although Anna lived in good style, in far better style than might have been expected, her means and her avocation were conjectural. Never was she at rest, never was she not busy with some mysterious something or other. Also, she possessed a wide and varied circle of friends. The stream of callers was perpetual, although God only knows who they were, or what their business was. No sooner did my mother hear the door-bell ring than off she would carry me to our own apartment. This greatly displeased Anna, who used again and again to assure my mother that we were too proud for our station in life. In fact, she would sulk for hours about it. At the time I could not understand these reproaches, and it was not until long afterwards that I learned, or rather I guessed, why eventually my mother declared that she could not go on living with Anna. Yes, Anna was a bad woman. Never did she let us alone. As to the exact motive why she had asked us to come and share her house with her, I am still in the dark. At first she was not altogether unkind to us, but later she revealed to us her real character. As soon, that is to say, as she saw that we were at her mercy and had nowhere else to go. Yes, in early days she was quite kind to me, even offensively so, but afterwards I had to suffer as much as my mother. Constantly did Anna reproach us, constantly did she remind us of her benefactions, and introduce us to her friends as poor relatives of hers whom, out of goodness of heart and for the love of Christ, she had received into her bosom. At table also she would watch every mouthful that we took, and if our appetite failed, immediately she would begin as before, and reiterate that we were over dainty, that we must not assume that riches would mean happiness, and that we had better go and live by ourselves. Moreover, she never ceased to inveigh against my father, saying that he had sought to be better than other people, and thereby had brought himself to a bad end, that he had left his wife and daughter destitute, and that, but for the fact that we had happened to meet with a kind and sympathetic Christian soul, God alone knew where we should have laid our heads, save in the street. What did that woman not say? To hear her was not so much galling as disgusting. From time to time my mother would burst into tears, her health grew worse from day to day, and her body was becoming sheer skin and bone. All the while, too, we had to work from morning till night, for we had contrived to obtain some employment as occasional seamstresses. This, however, did not please Anna, who used to tell us that there was no room in her house for a modist establishment. Yet we had to get clothes to wear, to provide for unforeseen expenses, and to have a little money at our disposal in case we should some day wish to remove elsewhere. Unfortunately, the strain undermined my mother's health, and she became gradually weaker. Sickness, like a canker-worm, was gnawing at her life, and dragging her towards the tomb. Well could I see what she was enduring, what she was suffering. Yes, it all lay open to my eyes. Day succeeded day, and each day was like the last one. We lived a life as quiet as though we had been in the country. Anna herself grew quieter in proportion as she came to realize the extent of her power over us. In nothing did we dare to thwart her. From her portion of the house our apartment was divided by a corridor, while next to us, as mentioned above, dwelt a certain Pokrovsky, who was engaged in teaching Sasha the French and German languages, as well as history and geography, all the sciences, as Anna used to say. In return for these services he received free board and lodging. As for Sasha, she was a clever but rude and uncouth girl of 13. On one occasion Anna remarked to my mother that it might be as well if I also were to take some lessons, seeing that my education had been neglected at school. And my mother joyfully assenting, I joined Sasha for a year in studying under this Pokrovsky. The latter was a very poor young man, whose health would not permit of his undertaking the regular university course. Indeed, it was only for form's sake that we called him the student. He lived in such a quiet, humble, retiring fashion that never a sound reached us from his room. Also, his exterior was peculiar. He moved and walked awkwardly, and uttered his words in such a strange manner that at first I could never look at him without laughing. Sasha was forever playing tricks upon him, more especially when he was giving us our lessons. But unfortunately he was of a temperament as excitable as herself. Indeed, he was so irritable that the least trifle would send him into a frenzy, and set him shouting at us, and complaining of our conduct. Sometimes he would even rush away to his room, before school hours were over, and sit there for days over his books, of which he had a store that was both rare and valuable. In addition, he acted as teacher at another establishment, and received payment for his services there, and whenever he had received his fees for this extra work, he would hasten off and purchase more books. In time I got to know and like him better, for in reality he was a good worthy fellow, more so than any of the people with whom we otherwise came in contact. My mother in particular had a great respect for him, and after herself he was my best friend. But at first I was just an overgrown hoyden, and joined Sasha in playing the fool. For hours we would devise tricks to anger and distract him, for he looked extremely ridiculous when he was angry, and so diverted us the more, ashamed though I am now to admit it. But once, when we had driven him nearly to tears, I heard him say to himself under his breath, "What cruel children!" And instantly I repented. I began to feel sad and ashamed and sorry for him. I reddened to my ears and begged him, almost with tears, not to mind us, nor to take offence at our stupid jests. Nevertheless, without finishing the lesson, he closed his book and departed to his own room. All that day I felt torn with remorse. To think that we 2 children had forced him, the poor, the unhappy one, to remember his hard lot. And at night I could not sleep for grief and regret. Remorse is said to bring relief to the soul, but it is not so. How far my grief was internally connected with my conceit, I do not know, but at least I did not wish him to think me a baby, seeing that I had now reached the age of 15 years. Therefore, from that day onwards, I began to torture my imagination with devising 1,000 schemes which should compel Pokrovsky to alter his opinion of me. At the same time, being yet shy and reserved by nature, I ended by finding that, in my present position, I could make up my mind to nothing but vague dreams. And such dreams I had. However, I ceased to join Sasha in playing the fool, while Pokrovsky, for his part, ceased to lose his temper with us so much. Unfortunately, this was not enough to satisfy my self-esteem. At this point, I must say a few words about the strangest, the most interesting, the most pitiable human being that I have ever come across. I speak of him now, at this particular point in these memoirs, for the reason that hitherto I had paid him no attention whatever, and began to do so now only because everything connected with Pokrovsky had suddenly become of absorbing interest in my eyes. Sometimes there came to the house a ragged, poorly dressed, grey-headed, awkward, amorphous, in short a very strange-looking little old man. At first glance it might have been thought that he was perpetually ashamed of something, that he had on his conscience something which always made him, as it were, bristle up and then shrink into himself. Such curious starts and grimaces did he indulge in, that one was forced to conclude that he was scarcely in his right mind. On arriving, he would halt for a while by the window in the hall, as though afraid to enter, until, should any one happen to pass in or out of the door, whether Sasha or myself, or one of the servants, to the latter he always resorted the most readily, as being the most nearly akin to his own class. He would begin to gesticulate and to beckon to that person and to make various signs. Then, should the person in question nod to him, or call him by name, the recognized token that no other visitor was present, and that he might enter freely, he would open the door gently, give a smile of satisfaction as he rubbed his hands together, and proceed on tiptoe to young Pokrovsky's room. This old fellow was none other than Pokrovsky's father. Later I came to know his story in detail. Formerly a civil servant, he had possessed no additional means, and so had occupied a very low and insignificant position in the service. Then, after his first wife, mother of the younger Pokrovsky, had died, the widower bethought him of marrying a second time, and took to himself a tradesman's daughter, who soon assumed the reins over everything, and brought the home to wreck and ruin, so that the old man was worse off than before. But to the younger Pokrovsky, fate proved kinder, for a landowner named Bykov, who had formerly known the lad's father and been his benefactor, took the boy under his protection and sent him to school. Another reason why this Bykov took an interest in young Pokrovsky was that he had known the lad's dead mother, who, while still a serving-maid, had been befriended by Anna Thedorovna, and subsequently married to the elder Pokrovsky. At the wedding, Bykov, actuated by his friendship for Anna, conferred upon the young bride a dowry of 5,000 roubles, but whither that money had since disappeared, I cannot say. It was from Anna's lips that I heard the story, for the student Pokrovsky was never prone to talk about his family affairs. His mother was said to have been very good looking, wherefore it is the more mysterious why she should have made so poor a match. She died when young, only 4 years after her espousal. From school, the young Pokrovsky advanced to a gymnasium, and thence to the university, where Bwikov, who frequently visited the capital, continued to accord the youth his protection. Gradually, however, ill health put an end to the young man's university course, whereupon Bwikov introduced and personally recommended him to Anna Thedorovna, and he came to lodge with her on condition that he taught Sasha whatever might be required of him. Grief at the harshness of his wife led the elder Pokrovsky to plunge into dissipation, and to remain in an almost permanent condition of drunkenness. Constantly his wife beat him, or sent him to sit in the kitchen, with the result that, in time, he became so inured to blows and neglect that he ceased to complain. Still not greatly advanced in years, he had nevertheless endangered his reason through evil courses, his only sign of decent human feeling being his love for his son. The latter was said to resemble his dead mother as one pea may resemble another. What recollections, therefore, of the kind helpmeet of former days may not have moved the breast of the poor broken old man to this boundless affection for the boy? Of naught else could the father ever speak but of his son, and never did he fail to visit him twice a week. To come oftener he did not dare, for the reason that the younger Pokrovsky did not like these visits of his father's. In fact, there can be no doubt that the youth's greatest fault was his lack of filial respect. Yet the father was certainly rather a difficult person to deal with, for in the first place he was extremely inquisitive, while in the second place his long-winded conversation and questions of the most vapid and senseless order conceivable, always prevented the son from working. Likewise, the old man occasionally arrived there drunk. Gradually, however, the son was weaning his parent from his vicious ways and everlasting inquisitiveness, and teaching the old man to look upon him, his son, as an oracle, and never to speak without that son's permission. On the subject of his Petinka, as he called him, the poor old man could never sufficiently rhapsodize and dilate. Yet when he arrived to see his son, he almost invariably had on his face a downcast, timid expression that was probably due to uncertainty concerning the way in which he would be received. For a long time he would hesitate to enter, and if I happened to be there, he would question me for 20 minutes or so as to whether his Petinka was in good health, as well as to the sort of mood he was in, whether he was engaged on matters of importance, what precisely he was doing, writing or meditating, and so on. Then, when I had sufficiently encouraged and reassured the old man, he would make up his mind to enter, and quietly and cautiously open the door. Next, he would protrude his head through the chink, and if he saw that his son was not angry, but threw him a nod, he would glide noiselessly into the room, take off his scarf, and hang up his head, the latter perennially in a bad state of repair, full of holes and with a smashed brim, the whole being done without a word or a sound of any kind. Next, the old man would seat himself wearily on a chair, and never removing his eyes from his son, follow his every movement, as though seeking to gauge Petinka's state of mind. On the other hand, if the son was not in good spirits, the father would make a note of the fact, and at once get up, saying that he had only called for a minute or two, that, having been out for a long walk and happening at the moment to be passing, he had looked in for a moment's rest. Then silently and humbly the old man would resume his hat and scarf, softly he would open the door, and noiselessly depart with a forced smile on his face, the better to bear the disappointment which was seething in his breast, the better to help him not to show it to his son. On the other hand, whenever the son received his father civilly, the old man would be struck dumb with joy. Satisfaction would beam in his face, in his every gesture, in his every movement. And if the son deigned to engage in conversation with him, the old man always rose a little from his chair, and answered softly, sympathetically, with something like reverence, while strenuously endeavouring to make use of the most recherché, that is to say, the most ridiculous, expressions. But alas, he had not the gift of words. Always he grew confused and turned red in the face. Never did he know what to do with his hands or with himself. Likewise, whenever he had returned an answer of any kind, He would go on repeating the same in a whisper, as though he were seeking to justify what he had just said. And if he happened to have returned a good answer, he would begin to preen himself, and to straighten his waistcoat, frock-coat, and tie, and to assume an air of conscious dignity. Indeed, on these occasions he would feel so encouraged, he would carry his daring to such a pitch, that, rising softly from his chair, he would approach the bookshelves, take thence a book, and read over to himself some passage or another. All this he would do with an air of feigned indifference and sang-froid, as though he were free always to use his son's books, and his son's kindness were no rarity at all. Yet on one occasion I saw the poor old fellow actually turn pale on being told by his son not to touch the books. Abashed and confused, he, in his awkward hurry, replaced the volume wrong side uppermost, whereupon, with a supreme effort to recover himself, he turned it round with a smile and a blush, as though he were at a loss how to view his own misdemeanour. Gradually, as already said, the younger Pokrovsky weaned his father from his dissipated ways, by giving him a small coin whenever, on 3 successive occasions, he, the father, arrived sober. Sometimes also the younger man would buy the older one shoes, or a tie, or a waistcoat, whereafter the old man would be as proud of his acquisition as a peacock. Not infrequently also the old man would step in to visit ourselves, and bring Sasha and myself gingerbread birds or apples, while talking unceasingly of Pietinka. Always he would beg of us to pay attention to our lessons, on the plea that Pietinka was a good son, an exemplary son, a son who was in twofold measure a man of learning, after which he would wink at us so quizzingly with his left eye, and twist himself about in such amusing fashion, that we were forced to burst out laughing. My mother had a great liking for him, but he detested Anna Thedorovna. Although in her presence he would be quieter than water, and lowlier than the earth. End of Section 10. Section 11 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 1st, Addendum 2, Part 2. Soon after this I ceased to take lessons of Pokrovsky. Even now he thought me a child, a raw schoolgirl, as much as he did Sasha, and this hurt me extremely, seeing that I had done so much to expiate my former behaviour. Of my efforts in this direction no notice had been taken, and the fact continued to anger me more and more. Scarcely ever did I address a word to my tutor between school hours, for I simply could not bring myself to do it. If I made the attempt, I only grew red and confused, and rushed away to weep in a corner. How it would all have ended I do not know, had not a curious incident helped to bring about a rapprochement. One evening, when my mother was sitting in Anna Thedorovna's room, I crept on tiptoe to Pokrovsky's apartment, in the belief that he was not at home. Some strange impulse moved me to do so. True, we had lived cheek by jowl with one another, yet never once had I caught a glimpse of his abode. Consequently, my heart beat loudly, so loudly indeed that it seemed almost to be bursting from my breast. On entering the room, I glanced around me with tense interest. The apartment was very poorly furnished, and bore few traces of orderliness. On table and chairs there lay heaps of books. Everywhere were books and papers. Then a strange thought entered my head, as well as, with the thought, an unpleasant feeling of irritation. It seemed to me that my friendship, my heart's affection, meant little to him, for he was well educated, whereas I was stupid, and had learned nothing, and had read not a single book. So I stood looking wistfully at the long bookshelves, where they groaned under their weight of volumes. I felt filled with grief, disappointment, and a sort of frenzy. I felt that I must read those books, and decided to do so, to read them one by one, and with all possible speed. Probably the idea was that, by learning whatsoever he knew, I should render myself more worthy of his friendship. So I made a rush towards the bookcase nearest me, and, without stopping further to consider matters, seized hold of the first dusty tome upon which my hands chanced to alight, and, reddening and growing pale by turns, and trembling with fear and excitement, clasped the stolen book to my breast, with the intention of reading it by candlelight while my mother lay asleep at night. But how vexed I felt when, on returning to our own room and hastily turning the pages, only an old, battered, worm-eaten Latin work greeted my eyes. Without loss of time I retraced my steps. Just when I was about to replace the book, I heard a noise in the corridor outside, and the sound of footsteps approaching. Fumblingly, I hastened to complete what I was about, but the tiresome book had become so tightly wedged into its row that on being pulled out it caused its fellows to close up too compactly to leave any place for their comrade. To insert the book was beyond my strength, yet still I kept pushing and pushing at the row. At last, the rusty nail which supported the shelf (the thing seemed to have been waiting on purpose for that moment) broke off short, with the result that the shelf descended with a crash, and the books piled themselves in a heap on the floor. Then the door of the room opened, and Pokrovsky entered. I must here remark that he never could bear to have his possessions tampered with. Woe to the person in particular who touched his books. Judge, therefore, of my horror when books small and great, books of every possible shape and size and thickness, came tumbling from the shelf, and flew and sprang over the table, and under the chairs, and about the whole room. I would have turned and fled, but it was too late. All is over, thought I. All is over. I am ruined. I am undone. Here have I been playing the fool like a 10-year-old child. What a stupid girl I am! The monstrous fool! Indeed, Pokrovsky was very angry. What? Have you not done enough? He cried. Are you not ashamed to be forever indulging in such pranks? Are you never going to grow sensible? With that he darted forward to pick up the books, while I bent down to help him. You need not, he went on. You would have done far better not to have entered without an invitation. Next, a little mollified by my humble demeanour, he resumed in his usual tutorial tone, the tone which he had adopted in his new-found role of preceptor. When are you going to grow steadier and more thoughtful? Consider yourself for a moment. You are no longer a child, a little girl, but a maiden of 15. Then, with a desire, probably, to satisfy himself that I was no longer a being of tender years, he threw me a glance, but straightway reddened to his very ears. This I could not understand, but stood gazing at him in astonishment. Presently he straightened himself a little, approached me with a sort of confused expression, and haltingly said something. Probably it was an apology for not having before perceived that I was now a grown-up young person. But the next moment I understood. What I did I hardly know, save that, in my dismay and confusion, I blushed even more hotly than he had done, and, covering my face with my hands, rushed from the room. What to do with myself for shame I could not think. The one thought in my head was that he had surprised me in his room. For 3 whole days I found myself unable to raise my eyes to his, but blushed always to the point of weeping. The strangest and most confused of thoughts kept entering my brain. One of them, the most extravagant, was that I should dearly like to go to Pokrovsky and to explain to him the situation, and to make full confession, and to tell him everything without concealment, and to assure him that I had not acted foolishly as a minx, but honestly and of set purpose. In fact, I did make up my mind to take this course, but lacked the necessary courage to do it. If I had done so, what a figure I should have cut! Even now I am ashamed to think of it. A few days later my mother suddenly fell dangerously ill. For 2 days past she had not left her bed, while during the 3rd night of her illness she became seized with fever and delirium. I also had not closed my eyes during the previous night, but now waited upon my mother, sat by her bed, brought her drinks at intervals, and gave her medicine at duly appointed hours. The next night I suffered terribly. Every now and then sleep would cause me to nod, and objects grow dim before my eyes. Also, my head was turning dizzy, and I could have fainted for the very weariness. Yet always my mother's feeble moans recalled me to myself as I started, momentarily awoke, and then again felt drowsiness overcoming me. What torture it was! I do not know, I cannot clearly remember, but I think that, during a moment when wakefulness was thus contending with slumber, a strange dream, a horrible vision, visited my overwrought brain, and I awoke in terror. The room was nearly in darkness, for the candle was flickering, and throwing stray beams of light, which suddenly illuminated the room, danced for a moment on the walls, and then disappeared. Somehow I felt afraid. A sort of horror had come upon me. My imagination had been overexcited by the evil dream which I had experienced, and a feeling of oppression was crushing my heart. I leapt from the chair, and involuntarily uttered a cry wrung from me by the terrible, torturing sensation that was upon me. Presently the door opened, and Pokrovsky entered. I remember that I was in his arms when I recovered my senses. Carefully seating me on a bench, he handed me a glass of water, and then asked me a few questions, though how I answered them I do not know. "You yourself are ill," he said as he took my hand. "You yourself are very ill. You are feverish, and I can see that you are knocking yourself out through your neglect of your own health. Take a little rest, lie down and go to sleep. Yes, lie down, he continued, without giving me time to protest. Indeed, fatigue had so exhausted my strength that my eyes were closing from very weakness. So I lay down on the bench with the intention of sleeping for half an hour only, but I slept till morning. Pokrovsky then awoke me, saying that it was time for me to go and give my mother her medicine. When the next evening about 8 o'clock I had rested a little and was preparing to spend the night in a chair beside my mother, fixedly meaning not to go to sleep this time, Pokrovsky suddenly knocked at the door. I opened it, and he informed me that, since, possibly, I might find the time wearisome, he had brought me a few books to read. I accepted the books, but do not, even now, know what books they were, nor whether I looked into them, despite the fact that I never closed my eyes the whole night long. The truth was that a strange feeling of excitement was preventing me from sleeping, and I could not rest long in any one spot, but had to keep rising from my chair and walking about the room. Throughout my whole being there seemed to be diffused a kind of elation at Pokrovsky's attentions, at the thought that he was anxious and uneasy about me. Until dawn I pondered and dreamed, and though I felt sure Pokrovsky would not again visit us that night, I gave myself up to fancies concerning what he might do the following evening. That evening, when everyone else in the house had retired to rest, Pokrovsky opened his door and opened a conversation from the threshold of his room. Although at this distance of time I cannot remember a word of what we said to one another, I remember that I blushed, grew confused, felt vexed with myself, and awaited with impatience the end of the conversation, although I myself had been longing for the meeting to take place, and had spent the day in dreaming of it, and devising a string of suitable questions and replies. Yes, that evening saw the first strand in our friendship knitted, and each subsequent night of my mother's illness we spent several hours together. Little by little I overcame his reserve, but found that each of these conversations left me filled with a sense of vexation at myself. At the same time, I could see with secret joy and a sense of proud elation that I was leading him to forget his tiresome books. At last the conversation turned jestingly upon the upsetting of the shelf. The moment was a peculiar one, for it came upon me just when I was in the right mood for self-revelation and candour. In my ardour, my curious phase of exaltation, I found myself led to make a full confession of the fact that I had become wishful to learn, to know, something, since I had felt hurt at being taken for a chit, a mere baby. I repeat that night I was in a very strange frame of mind. My heart was inclined to be tender, and there were tears standing in my eyes. Nothing did I conceal as I told him about my friendship for him, about my desire to love him, about my scheme for living in sympathy with him, and comforting him, and making his life easier. In return he threw me a look of confusion mingled with astonishment, and said nothing. Then suddenly I began to feel terribly pained and disappointed, for I conceived that he had failed to understand me, or even that he might be laughing at me. Bursting into tears like a child, I sobbed, and could not stop myself, for I had fallen into a kind of fit, whereupon he seized my hand, kissed it, and clasped it to his breast, saying various things meanwhile to comfort me, for he was labouring under a strong emotion. Exactly what he said I do not remember. I merely wept and laughed by turns, and blushed, and found myself unable to speak a word for joy. Yet for all my agitation, I noticed that about him there still lingered an air of constraint and uneasiness. Evidently he was lost in wonder at my enthusiasm and raptures, at my curiously ardent, unexpected, consuming friendship. It may be that at first he was amazed, but that afterwards he accepted my devotion and words of invitation and expressions of interest with the same simple frankness as I had offered them, and responded to them with an interest, a friendliness, a devotion equal to my own, even as a friend or a brother would do. How happy, how warm was the feeling in my heart! Nothing had I concealed or repressed. No, I had bared all to his sight, and each day would see him draw nearer to me. Truly I could not say what we did not talk about during those painful yet rapturous hours when, by the trembling light of a lamp, and almost at the very bedside of my poor sick mother, we kept midnight tryst. Whatsoever first came into our heads we spoke of, whatsoever came riven from our hearts, whatsoever seemed to call for utterance, found voice. And almost always we were happy. What a grievous yet joyous period it was! A period grievous and joyous at the same time. To this day it both hurts and delights me to recall it. Joyous or bitter though it was, its memories are yet painful. At least they seem so to me, though a certain sweetness assuage the pain. So whenever I am feeling heartsick and oppressed, and jaded and sad, those memories return to freshen and revive me, even as drops of evening dew return to freshen and revive after a sultry day the poor faded flower which has long been drooping in the noontide heat. My mother grew better, but still I continued to spend the nights on a chair by her bedside. Often too Pokrovsky would give me books. At first I read them merely so as to avoid going to sleep, but afterwards I examined them with more attention, and subsequently with actual avidity, for they opened up to me a new, an unexpected, an unknown, an unfamiliar world. New thoughts, added to new impressions, would come pouring into my heart in a rich flood, and the more emotion, the more pain and labour it cost me to assimilate these new impressions, the dearer did they become to me, and the more gratefully did they stir my soul to its very depth. Crowding into my heart without giving it time even to breathe, they would cause my whole being to become lost in a wondrous chaos. Yet this spiritual ferment was not sufficiently strong wholly to undo me. For that I was too fanciful, and the fact saved me. With the passing of my mother's illness, the midnight meetings and long conversations between myself and Pokrovsky came to an end. Only occasionally did we exchange a few words with one another, words, for the most part, that were of little purport or substance, yet words to which it delighted me to apportion their several meanings, their peculiar secret values. My life had now become full. I was happy. I was quietly, restfully happy. Thus did several weeks elapse. End of section 11. Section 12 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 1st, Addendum 2, Part 3. One day the elder Pokrovsky came to see us, and chattered in a brisk, cheerful, garrulous sort of way. He laughed, launched out into witticisms, and finally resolved the riddle of his transports by informing us that in a week's time it would be his Petinka's birthday, when, in honour of the occasion, he, the father, meant to don a new jacket, as well as new shoes which his wife was going to buy for him, and to come and pay a visit to his son. In short, the old man was perfectly happy, and gossiped about whatsoever first entered his head. My lover's birthday! Thenceforward I could not rest by night or day. Whatever might happen, it was my fixed intention to remind Pokrovsky of our friendship by giving him a present. But what sort of present? Finally I decided to give him books. I knew that he had long wanted to possess a complete set of Pushkin's works, in the latest edition. So I decided to buy Pushkin. My private fund consisted of 30 roubles, earned by handiwork, and designed eventually to procure me a new dress, but at once I dispatched our cook, old Matrena, to ascertain the price of such an edition. Horrors! The price of the 11 volumes, added to extra outlay upon the binding, would amount to at least 60 roubles. Where was the money to come from? I thought and thought, yet could not decide. I did not like to resort to my mother. Of course she would help me, but in that case every one in the house would become aware of my gift, and the gift itself would assume the guise of a recompense, of payment for Pokrovsky's labours on my behalf during the past year, whereas I wished to present the gift alone, and without the knowledge of any one. For the trouble that he had taken with me, I wished to be his perpetual debtor, to make him no payment at all save my friendship. At length I thought of a way out of the difficulty. I knew that of the hucksters in the Gostiny Dvor one could sometimes buy a book, even one that had been little used and was almost entirely new, for a half of its price, provided that one haggled sufficiently over it, wherefore I determined to repair thither. It so happened that next day both Anna Thedorovna and ourselves were in want of sundry articles, and since my mother was unwell and Anna lazy, the execution of the commissions devolved upon me, and I set forth with Matrena. Luckily I soon chanced upon a set of Pushkin, handsomely bound, and set myself to bargain for it. At first more was demanded than would have been asked for me in a shop, but afterwards, though not without a great deal of trouble on my part, and several feints at departing, I induced the dealer to lower his price, and to limit his demands to 10 roubles in silver. How I rejoiced that I had engaged in this bargaining! Poor Matrena could not imagine what had come to me, nor why I so desired to buy books. But, oh horror of horrors! As soon as ever the dealer caught sight of my capital of 30 roubles in notes, he refused to let the Pushkin go for less than the sum he had first named. And though in answer to my prayers and protestations he eventually yielded a little, he did so only to the tune of 2½ roubles more than I possessed, while swearing that he was making the concession for my sake alone, since I was a sweet young lady, and that he would have done so for no one else in the world. To think that only 2½ roubles should still be wanting! I could have wept with vexation. Suddenly an unlooked-for circumstance occurred to help me in my distress. Not far away, near another table that was heaped with books, I perceived the elder Pokrovsky, and a crowd of 4 or 5 hucksters plaguing him nearly out of his senses. Each of these fellows was proffering the old man his own particular wares, and while there was nothing that they did not submit for his approval, there was nothing that he wished to buy. The poor old fellow had the air of a man who is receiving a thrashing. What to make of what he was being offered him he did not know. Approaching him, I inquired what he happened to be doing there, whereat the old man was delighted, since he liked me, it may be, no less than he did Petinka. "I am buying some books, Barbara Alexievna," said he. "I am buying them for my Petinka. It will be his birthday soon, and since he likes books, I thought I would get him some." The old man always expressed himself in a very roundabout sort of fashion, and on the present occasion he was doubly, terribly confused. Of no matter what book he asked the price, it was sure to be 1, 2, or 3 roubles. The larger books he could not afford at all. He could only look at them wistfully, fumble their leaves with his finger, turn over the volumes in his hands, and then replace them. "No, no, that is too dear," he would mutter under his breath. "I must go and try somewhere else." Then again he would fall to examining copy-books, collections of poems, and almanacs of the cheaper order. "Why should you buy things like those?" I asked him. "They are such rubbish." "No, no," he replied. "See what nice books they are. Yes, they are nice books." Yet these last words he uttered so lingeringly that I could see he was ready to weep with vexation at finding the better sorts of books so expensive. Already a little tear was trickling down his pale cheeks and red nose. I inquired whether he had much money on him, whereupon the poor old fellow pulled out his entire stock, wrapped in a piece of dirty newspaper, and consisting of a few small silver coins, with 20 kopecks in copper. At once I seized the lot, and dragging him off to my huckster, said, "Look here, these 11 volumes of Pushkin are priced at 32½ roubles, and I have only 30 roubles. Let us add to them these 2½ roubles of yours, and buy the books together, and make them our joint gift." The old man was overjoyed, and pulled out his money en masse, whereupon the huckster loaded him with our common library. Stuffing it into his pockets, as well as filling both arms with it, he departed homewards with his prize, after giving me his word to bring me the books privately on the morrow. Next day the old man came to see his son, and sat with him as usual for about an hour, after which he visited ourselves, wearing on his face the most comical, the most mysterious expression conceivable. Smiling broadly with satisfaction at the thought that he was the possessor of a secret, he informed me that he had stealthily brought the books to our rooms, and hidden them in a corner of the kitchen, under Matrena's care. Next, by a natural transition, the conversation passed to the coming fête day, whereupon the old man proceeded to hold forth extensively on the subject of gifts. The further he delved into his thesis, and the more he expounded it, the clearer could I see that on his mind there was something which he could not, dared not divulge. So I waited and kept silent. The mysterious exultation, the repressed satisfaction which I had hitherto discerned in his antics and grimaces and left-eyed winks, gradually disappeared, and he began to grow momentarily more anxious and uneasy. At length he could contain himself no longer. "Listen, Barbara Alexievna," he said timidly. "Listen to what I have got to say to you. When his birthday is come, do you take 10 of the books and give them to him yourself, that is, for yourself, as being your share of the gift. Then I will take the 11th book and give it to him myself, as being my gift. If we do that, you will have a present for him, and I shall have one, both of us alike." "Why do you not want us to present our gifts together, Zachar Petrovitch?" I asked him. "Oh, very well," he replied. "Very well, Barbara Alexievna. Only I thought that—" The old man broke off in confusion, while his face flushed with the exertion of thus expressing himself. For a moment or two he sat glued to his seat. "You see," he went on, "I play the fool too much. I am forever playing the fool, and cannot help myself, though I know that it is wrong to do so. At home it is often cold, and sometimes there are other troubles as well, and it all makes me depressed. Well, whenever that happens, I indulge a little, and occasionally drink too much. Now Petinka does not like that. He loses his temper about it, Barbara Alexievna, and scolds me and reads me lectures. So I want by my gift to show him that I am mending my ways, and beginning to conduct myself better. For a long time past I have been saving up to buy him a book. Yes, for a long time past I have been saving up for it, since it is seldom that I have any money, unless Petinka happens to give me some. He knows that, and consequently, as soon as ever he perceives the use to which I have put his money, he will understand that it is for his sake alone that I have acted." My heart ached for the old man. Seeing him looking at me with such anxiety, I made up my mind without delay. "I tell you what," I said, "do you give him all the books." "All!" he ejaculated. "All the books?" "Yes, all of them." "As my own gift?" "Yes, as your own gift." "As my gift alone?" "Yes, as your gift alone." Surely I had spoken clearly enough, yet the old man seemed hardly to understand me. "Well," said he after reflection, "that certainly would be splendid, certainly it would be most splendid. But what about yourself, Barbara Alexievna?" "Oh, I shall give your son nothing." "What?" he cried in dismay. "Are you going to give Petinka nothing? Do you wish to give him nothing?" So put about was the old fellow with what I had said, that he seemed almost ready to renounce his own proposal, if only I would give his son something. What a kind heart he had! I hastened to assure him that I should certainly have a gift of some sort ready, since my one wish was to avoid spoiling his pleasure. "Provided that your son is pleased," I added, "and that you are pleased, I shall be equally pleased, for in my secret heart I shall feel as though I had presented the gift. This fully reassured the old man. He stopped with us another couple of hours, yet could not sit still for a moment, but kept jumping up from his seat, laughing, cracking jokes with Sasha, bestowing stealthy kisses upon myself, pinching my hands, and making silent grimaces at Anna Thedorovna. At length she turned him out of the house. In short, his transports of joy exceeded anything that I had yet beheld. On the festal day he arrived exactly at 11 o'clock, direct from mass. He was dressed in a carefully mended frock coat, a new waistcoat, and a pair of new shoes, while in his arms he carried our pile of books. Next we all sat down to coffee, the day being Sunday, in Anna Thedorovna's parlour. The old man led off the meal by saying that Pushkin was a magnificent poet. Thereafter, with a return to shamefacedness and confusion, he passed suddenly to the statement that a man ought to conduct himself properly, that should he not do so, it might be taken as a sign that he was in some way over-indulging himself, and that evil tendencies of this sort led to the man's ruin and degradation. Then the orator sketched for our benefit some terrible instances of such incontinence, and concluded by informing us that for some time past he had been mending his own ways, and conducting himself in exemplary fashion, for the reason that he had perceived the justice of his son's precepts, and had laid them to heart so well that he, the father, had really changed for the better. In proof whereof, he now begged to present to the said son some books for which he had long been setting aside his savings. As I listened to the old man, I could not help laughing and crying in a breath. Certainly he knew how to lie when the occasion required. The books were transferred to his son's room, and arranged upon a shelf, where Pokrovsky at once guessed the truth about them. Then the old man was invited to dinner, and we all spent a merry day together at cards and forfeits. Sasha was full of life, and I rivaled her, while Pokrovsky paid me numerous attentions, and kept seeking an occasion to speak to me alone. But to allow this to happen I refused. Yes, taken all in all, it was the happiest day that I had known for 4 years. But now only grievous, painful memories come to my recollection, for I must enter upon the story of my darker experiences. It may be that that is why my pen begins to move more slowly, and seems as though it were going altogether to refuse to write. The same reason may account for my having undertaken so lovingly and enthusiastically a recounting of even the smallest details of my younger, happier days. But alas, those days did not last long, and were succeeded by a period of black sorrow, which will close only God knows when. My misfortunes began with the illness and death of Pokrovsky, who was taken worse 2 months after what I have last recorded in these memoirs. During those 2 months he worked hard to procure himself a livelihood, since hitherto he had had no assured position. Like all consumptives, he never, not even up to his last moment, altogether abandoned the hope of being able to enjoy a long life. A post as tutor fell in his way, but he had never liked the profession, while for him to become a civil servant was out of the question, owing to his weak state of health. Moreover, in the latter capacity, he would have had to have waited a long time for his first installment of salary. Again, he always looked at the darker side of things, for his character was gradually being warped, and his health undermined by his illness, though he never noticed it. Then autumn came on, and daily he went out to business, that is to say, to apply for and to canvass for posts, clad only in a light jacket, with the result that, after repeated soakings with rain, he had to take to his bed, and never again left it. He died in mid-autumn at the close of the month of October. Throughout his illness I scarcely ever left his room, but waited on him hand and foot. Often he could not sleep for several nights at a time. Often too he was unconscious, or else in a delirium, and at such times he would talk of all sorts of things, of his work, of his books, of his father, of myself. At such times I learned much which I had not hitherto known or divined about his affairs. During the early part of his illness every one in the house looked askance at me, and Anna Thedorovna would nod her head in a meaning manner, but I always looked them straight in the face, and gradually they ceased to take any notice of my concern for Pokrovsky. At all events, my mother ceased to trouble her head about it. Sometimes Pokrovsky would know who I was, but not often, for more usually he was unconscious. Sometimes too he would talk all night with some unknown person, in dim mysterious language that caused his gasping voice to echo hoarsely through the narrow room as through a sepulchre, and at such times I found the situation a strange one. During his last night he was especially light-headed, for then he was in terrible agony, and kept rambling in his speech until my soul was torn with pity. Everyone in the house was alarmed, and Anna Thedorovna fell to praying that God might soon take him. When the doctor had been summoned, the verdict was that the patient would die with the morning. That night the elder Pokrovsky spent in the corridor, at the door of his son's room. Though given a mattress to lie upon, he spent his time in running in and out of the apartment. So broken with grief was he that he presented a dreadful spectacle, and appeared to have lost both perception and feeling. His head trembled with agony, and his body quivered from head to foot as at times he murmured to himself something which he appeared to be debating. Every moment I expected to see him go out of his mind. Just before dawn he succumbed to the stress of mental agony, and fell asleep on his mattress like a man who has been beaten. But by 8 o'clock the son was at the point of death, and I ran to wake the father. The dying man was quite conscious, and bid us all farewell. Somehow I could not weep, though my heart seemed to be breaking. The last moments were the most harassing and heartbreaking of all. For some time past Pokrovsky had been asking for something with his failing tongue, but I had been unable to distinguish his words. Yet my heart had been bursting with grief. Then for an hour he had lain quieter, except that he had looked sadly in my direction, and striven to make some sign with his death-cold hands. At last he again essayed his piteous request in a hoarse, deep voice, but the words issued in so many inarticulate sounds, and once more I failed to divine his meaning. By turns I brought each member of the household to his bedside, and gave him something to drink, but he only shook his head sorrowfully. Finally I understood what it was he wanted. He was asking me to draw aside the curtain from the window, and to open the casements. Probably he wished to take his last look at the daylight, and the sun, and all God's world. I pulled back the curtain, but the opening day was as dull and mournful, looking as though it had been the fast flickering life of the poor invalid. Of sunshine there was none. Clouds overlaid the sky as with a shroud of mist, and everything looked sad, rainy, and threatening under a fine drizzle which was beating against the window panes, and streaking their dull, dark surfaces with runlets of cold, dirty moisture. Only a scant modicum of daylight entered to war with the trembling rays of the icon lamp. The dying man threw me a wistful look, and nodded. The next moment he passed away. The funeral was arranged for by Anna Thedorovna. A plain coffin was bought, and a broken-down hearse hired, while as security for this outlay she seized the dead man's books and other articles. Nevertheless the old man disputed the books with her, and raising an uproar, carried off as many of them as he could, stuffing his pockets full, and even filling his hat. Indeed, he spent the next 3 days with them thus, and refused to let them leave his side even when it was time for him to go to church. Throughout he acted like a man bereft of sense and memory. With quaint assiduity he busied himself about the bier, now straightening the candlestick on the dead man's breast, now snuffing and lighting the other candles. Clearly his thoughts were powerless to remain long fixed on any subject. Neither my mother nor Anna Fedorovna were present at the requiem, for the former was ill, and the latter was at loggerheads with the old man. Only myself and the father were there. During the service, a sort of panic, a sort of premonition of the future came over me, and I could hardly hold myself upright. At length the coffin had received its burden, and was screwed down, after which the bearers placed it upon a bier, and set out. I accompanied the cortege only to the end of the street. Here the driver broke into a trot, and the old man started to run behind the hearse, sobbing loudly, but with the motion of his running ever and anon causing the sobs to quaver and become broken off. Next he lost his hat, the poor old fellow, yet would not stop to pick it up, even though the rain was beating upon his head, and the wind was rising, and the sleet kept stinging and lashing his face. It seemed as though he were impervious to the cruel elements, as he ran from one side of the hearse to the other, the skirts of his old greatcoat flapping about him like a pair of wings. From every pocket of the garment protruded books, while in his hand he carried a specially large volume, which he hugged closely to his breast. The passers-by uncovered their heads and crossed themselves as the cortege passed, and some of them, having done so, remained staring in amazement at the poor old man. Every now and then a book would slip from one of his pockets and fall into the mud, whereupon somebody, stopping him, would direct his attention to his loss, and he would stop, pick up the book, and again set off in pursuit of the hearse. At the corner of the street he was joined by a ragged old woman, until at length the hearse turned a corner and became hidden from my eyes. Then I went home, and threw myself in a transport of grief upon my mother's breast, clasping her in my arms, kissing her amid a storm of sobs and tears, and clinging to her form as though in my embraces I were holding my last friend on earth, that I might preserve her from death. Yet already death was standing over her. End of section 12. Section 13 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 11th. How I thank you for our walk to the islands yesterday, Makar Alexievitch! How fresh and pleasant, how full of verdure was everything, and I had not seen anything green for such a long time. During my illness I used to think that I should never get better, that I was certainly going to die. Judge, then, how I felt yesterday. True, I may have seemed to you a little sad, and you must not be angry with me for that. Happy and light-hearted though I was, there were moments, even at the height of my felicity, when, for some unknown reason, depression came sweeping over my soul. I kept weeping about trifles, yet could not say why I was grieved. The truth is that I am unwell, so much so that I look at everything from the gloomy point of view. The pale, clear sky, the setting sun, the evening stillness. Ah! Somehow I felt disposed to grieve and feel hurt at these things. My heart seemed to be overcharged, and to be calling for tears to relieve it. But why should I write this to you? It is difficult for my heart to express itself, still more difficult for it to forego self-expression. Yet possibly you may understand me. Tears and laughter. How good you are, Makar Alexievitch! Yesterday you looked into my eyes as though you could read in them all that I was feeling, as though you were rejoicing at my happiness. Whether it were a group of shrubs, or an alleyway, or a vista of water that we were passing, you would halt before me and stand gazing at my face, as though you were showing me possessions of your own. It told me how kind is your nature, and I love you for it. Today I am again unwell, for yesterday I wetted my feet and took a chill. Thedora also is unwell. Both of us are ailing. Do not forget me. Come and see me as often as you can. Your own, Barbara Alexievna. End of section 13.
Section 14 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 12. My dearest Barbara Alexeyevna, I had supposed that you meant to describe our doings of the other day in verse. Yet from you there has arrived only a single sheet of writing. Nevertheless, I must say that, little though you have put into your letter, that little is not expressed with rare beauty and grace. Nature, your descriptions of rural scenes, your analysis of your own feelings, The whole is beautifully written. Alas, I have no such talent. Though I may fill a score of pages, nothing comes of it. I might as well never have put pen to paper. Yes, this I know from experience. You say, my darling, that I am kind and good, that I could not harm my fellow men, that I have power to comprehend the goodness of God, as expressed in nature's handiwork, and so on. It may all be so, my dearest one. It may all be exactly as you say. Indeed, I think that you are right. But if so, the reason is that when one reads such a letter as you have just sent me, one's heart involuntarily softens, and affords entrance to thoughts of a graver and weightier order. Listen, my darling. I have something to tell you, my beloved one. I will begin from the time when I was 17 years old and first entered the service, though I shall soon have completed my 30th year of official activity. I may say that at first I was much pleased with my new uniform, and as I grew older I grew in mind and fell to studying my fellow men. Likewise I may say that I lived an upright life, so much so that at last I incurred persecution. This you may not believe, but it is true. To think that men so cruel should exist! For though, dearest one, I am dull and of no account, I have feelings like everyone else. Consequently, would you believe it, Barbara, when I tell you what these cruel fellows did to me, I feel ashamed to tell it you, and all because I was of a quiet, peaceful, good-natured disposition. Things began with, "This or that, Makar Alexievitch, is your fault." Then it went on to, "I need hardly say that the fault is wholly Makar Alexievitch's." Finally it became, "Of course Makar Alexievitch is to blame." Do you see the sequence of things, my darling? Every mistake was attributed to me until Makar Alexievitch became a byword in our department. Also, while making of me a proverb, these fellows could not give me a smile or a civil word. They found fault with my boots, with my uniform, with my hair, with my figure. None of these things were to their taste. Everything had to be changed. And so it has been from that day to this. True, I have now grown used to it, for I can grow accustomed to anything, being, as you know, a man of peaceable disposition, like all men of small stature. Yet why should these things be? Whom have I harmed? Whom have I ever supplanted? Whom have I ever traduced to his superiors? No. The fault is that more than once I have asked for an increase of salary. But have I ever caballed for it? No. You would be wrong in thinking so, my dearest one. How could I ever have done so? You yourself have had many opportunities of seeing how incapable I am of deceit or chicanery. Why, then, should this have fallen to my lot? However, since you think me worthy of respect, my darling, I do not care, for you are far and away the best person in the world. What do you consider to be the greatest social virtue? In private conversation, Evstafi Ivanovitch once told me that the greatest social virtue might be considered to be an ability to get money to spend. Also, my comrades used jestingly, yes, I know, only jestingly, to propound the ethical maxim that a man ought never to let himself become a burden upon anyone. Well, I am a burden upon no one. It is my own crust of bread that I eat, and though that crust is but a poor one, and sometimes actually a maggoty one, it has at least been earned, and therefore is being put to a right and lawful use. What, therefore, ought I to do? I know that I can earn but little by my labours as a copyist, yet even of that little I am proud, for it has entailed work, and has wrung sweat from my brow. What harm is there in being a copyist? He is only an amanuensis, people say of me. But what is there so disgraceful in that? My writing is at least legible, neat, and pleasant to look upon, and his Excellency is satisfied with it. Indeed, I transcribe many important documents. At the same time, I know that my writing lacks style, which is why I have never risen in the service. Even to you, my dear one, I write simply and without tricks, but just as a thought may happen to enter my head. Yes, I know all this, but if every one were to become a fine writer, who would there be left to act as copyists? Whatsoever questions I may put to you in my letters, dearest, I pray you to answer them. I am sure that you need me, that I can be of use to you, and since that is so, I must not allow myself to be distracted by any trifle. Even if I be likened to a rat, I do not care, provided that that particular rat be wanted by you, and be of use in the world, and be retained in its position, and receive its reward. But what a rat it is! Enough of this, dearest one. I ought not to have spoken of it, but I lost my temper. Still, it is pleasant to speak the truth sometimes. Goodbye, my own, my darling, my sweet little comforter. I will come to you soon, yes, I will certainly come to you. Until I do so, do not fret yourself. With me I shall be bringing a book. Once more goodbye. Your heartfelt well-wisher, Makar Dievushkin. End of section 14.
Section 15 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 20th. My dearest Makar Alexievitch, I am writing to you post haste. I am hurrying my utmost to get my work finished in time. What do you suppose is the reason for this? It is because an opportunity has occurred for you to make a splendid purchase. Thedora tells me that a retired civil servant of her acquaintance has a uniform to sell, one cut to regulation pattern and in good repair, as well as likely to go very cheap. Now do not tell me that you have not got the money, for I know from your own lips that you have. Use that money, I pray you, and do not hoard it. See what terrible garments you walk about in. They are shameful. They are patched all over. In fact, you have nothing new whatever. That this is so I know for certain, and I care not what you tell me about it. So listen to me for once, and buy this uniform. Do it for my sake. Do it to show that you really love me. You have sent me some linen as a gift, but listen to me, Makar Alexievitch. You are simply ruining yourself. Is it a jest that you should spend so much money, such a terrible amount of money, upon me? How you love to play the spendthrift! I tell you that I do not need it, that such expenditure is unnecessary. I know, I am certain that you love me. Therefore it is useless to remind me of the fact with gifts. Nor do I like receiving them, since I know how much they must have cost you. No, put your money to a better use. I beg, I beseech of you to do so. Also, you ask me to send you a continuation of my memoirs, to conclude them. But I know not how I contrived even to write as much of them as I did, and now I have not the strength to write further of my past, nor the desire to give it a single thought. Such recollections are terrible to me. Most difficult of all is it for me to speak of my poor mother, who left her destitute daughter a prey to villains. My heart runs blood whenever I think of it. It is so fresh in my memory that I cannot dismiss it from my thoughts, nor rest for its insistence, although a year has now elapsed since the events took place. But all this you know. Also, I have told you what Anna Thedorovna is now intending. She accuses me of ingratitude, and denies the accusations made against herself with regard to Monsieur Bwikov. Also, she keeps sending for me, and telling me that I have taken to evil courses, but that if I will return to her, she will smooth over matters with Bwikov. and force him to confess his fault. Also, she says that he desires to give me a dowry. Away with them all! I am quite happy here with you and good Thedora, whose devotion to me reminds me of my old nurse, long since dead. Distant kinsman though you may be, I pray you always to defend my honour. Other people I do not wish to know, and would gladly forget if I could. What are they wanting with me now? Thedora declares it all to be a trick, and says that in time they will leave me alone. God grant it be so. B. D. End of section 15.
Section 16 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 21st. My own, my darling, I wish to write to you, yet know not where to begin. Things are as strange as though we were actually living together. Also, I would add that never in my life have I passed such happy days as I am spending at present. 'Tis as though God had blessed me with a home and a family of my own. Yes, you are my little daughter beloved. But why mention the 4 sorry roubles that I sent you? You needed them. I know that from Thedora herself, and it will always be a particular pleasure to me to gratify you in anything. It will always be my one happiness in life. Pray, therefore, leave me that happiness, and do not seek to cross me in it. Things are not as you suppose. I have now reached the sunshine since, in the first place, I am living so close to you as almost to be with you, which is a great consolation to my mind, while in the second place a neighbour of mine, named Ratazieff, the retired official who gives the literary parties, has today invited me to tea. This evening, therefore, there will be a gathering at which we shall discuss literature. Oh, think of that, my darling. Well, goodbye now. I have written this without any definite aim in my mind, but solely to assure you of my welfare. Through Teresa, I have received your message that you need an embroidered cloak to wear, so I will go and purchase one. Yes, tomorrow. I mean to purchase that embroidered cloak, and so give myself the pleasure of having satisfied one of your wants. I know where to go for such a garment. For the time being, I remain your sincere friend, Makar Dievushkin. End of section 16. Section 17 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 22nd. My dearest Barbara Alexievna, I have to tell you that a sad event has happened in this house, an event to excite one's utmost pity. This morning, about 5 o'clock, one of Gorshkov's children died of scarlatina, or something of the kind. I have been to pay the parents a visit of condolence, and found them living in the direst poverty and disorder. Nor is that surprising, seeing that the family lives in a single room, with only a screen to divide it for decency's sake. Already the coffin was standing in their midst, a plain but decent shell which had been bought ready-made. The child, they told me, had been a boy of 9 and full of promise. What a pitiful spectacle! Though not weeping, the mother, poor woman, looked broken with grief. After all, to have one burden the less on their shoulders may prove a relief, though there are still 2 children left, a babe at the breast and a little girl of 6. How painful to see these suffering children and to be unable to help them! The father, clad in an old dirty frock coat, was seated on a dilapidated chair. Down his cheeks there were coursing tears, though less through grief than owing to a long-standing affliction of the eyes. He was so thin, too. Always he reddens in the face when he is addressed, and becomes too confused to answer. A little girl, his daughter, was leaning against the coffin, her face looking so warm and thoughtful, poor mite. Do you know, I cannot bear to see a child look thoughtful. On the floor there lay a rag doll, but she was not playing with it, as, motionless, she stood there with her finger to her lips. Even a bonbon, which the landlady had given her, she was not eating. Is it not all sad, sad, Barbara? Makar, Dievushkin. End of section 17.
Section 18 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 25th. My beloved Makar Alexievitch, I return you your book. In my opinion, it is a worthless one, and I would rather not have it in my possession. Why do you save up your money to buy such trash? Except in jest, do such books really please you? However, you have now promised to send me something else to read. I will share the cost of it. Now, farewell until we meet again. I have nothing more to say. B.D. End of section 18.
Section 19 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 26th. My dear little Barbara, to tell you the truth, I myself have not read the book of which you speak. That is to say, though I began to read it, I soon saw that it was nonsense and written only to make people laugh. However, thought I, it is at least a cheerful work, and so may please Barbara. That is why I sent it you. Rataziaev has now promised to give me something really literary to read, so you shall soon have your book, my darling. He is a man who reflects. He is a clever fellow, as well as himself a writer, such a writer. His pen glides along with ease, and in such a style, even when he is writing the most ordinary, the most insignificant of articles, that I have often remarked upon the fact, both to Faldone and to Teresa. Often, too, I go to spend an evening with him. He reads aloud to us until 5 o'clock in the morning, and we listen to him. It is a revelation of things rather than a reading. It is charming. It is like a bouquet of flowers. There is a bouquet of flowers in every line of each page. Besides, he is such an approachable, courteous, kind-hearted fellow. What am I compared with him? Why, nothing, simply nothing. He is a man of reputation, whereas I, well, I do not exist at all. Yet he condescends to my level. At this very moment I am copying out a document for him. But you must not think that he finds any difficulty in condescending to me, who am only a copyist. No, you must not believe the base gossip that you may hear. I do copying work for him simply in order to please myself, as well as that he may notice me, a thing that always gives me pleasure. I appreciate the delicacy of his position. He is a very good man, and an unapproachable writer. What a splendid thing is literature, Barbara! What a splendid thing! This I learnt before I had known Rataziaev even for 3 days. It strengthens and instructs the heart of man. No matter what there be in the world, you will find it all written down in Rataziaev's works, and so well written down, too. Literature is a sort of picture or mirror. It connotes at once passion, expression, fine criticism, good learning, and a document. Yes, I have learnt this from Rataziaev himself. I can assure you, Barbara, that if only you could be sitting among us and listening to the talk, while, with the rest of us, you smoked a pipe, and were to hear those present begin to argue and dispute concerning different matters, you would feel of as little account among them as I do. For I myself figure there only as a blockhead, and feel ashamed, since it takes me a whole evening to think of a single word to interpolate, and even then the word will not come. In a case like that, a man regrets that, as the proverb has it, he should have reached man's estate, but not man's understanding. What do I do in my spare time? I sleep like a fool, though I would far rather be occupied with something else. Say with eating or writing, since the one is useful to oneself, and the other is beneficial to one's fellows. You should see how much money these fellows contrive to save. How much, for instance, does not Rataziaev lay by? A few days' writing, I am told, can earn him as much as 300 roubles. Indeed, if a man be a writer of short stories or anything else that is interesting, he can sometimes pocket 500 roubles or 1,000 at a time. Oh, think of it, Barbara! Rataziaev has by him a small manuscript of verses, and for it he is asking, what do you think? 7,000 roubles! Why, one could buy a whole house for that sum. He has even refused 5,000 for a manuscript, and on that occasion I reasoned with him, and advised him to accept the 5,000, but it was of no use. For, said he, they will soon offer me 7,000, and kept to his point, for he is a man of some determination. Suppose, now, that I were to give you an extract from Passion in Italy, as another work of his is called. Read this, dearest Barbara, and judge for yourself. Vladimir started, for in his veins the lust of passion had welled until it had reached a boiling point. "Countess," he cried, "do you know how terrible is this adoration of mine? How infinite this madness? No! My fancies have not deceived me. I love you ecstatically, diabolically, as a madman might. All the blood that is in your husband's body could never quench the furious, surging rapture that is in my soul. No puny obstacle could thwart the all-destroying infernal flame which is eating into my exhausted breast. Oh, Zinaida, my Zinaida!" "Vladimir," she whispered, almost beside herself, as she sank upon his bosom. "My Zinaida!" cried the enraptured Smileski once more. His breath was coming in sharp, broken pants. The lamp of love was burning brightly on the altar of passion, and searing the hearts of the two unfortunate unfortunate sufferers. Vladimir! Again she whispered in her intoxication, while her bosom heaved, her cheeks glowed, and her eyes flashed fire. Thus was a new dread union consummated. Half an hour later, the aged count entered his wife's boudoir. "How now, my love?" said he. "Surely it is for some welcome guest beyond the common that you have had the samovar (tea urn) thus prepared." And he smote her lightly on the cheek. "What think you of that, Barbara? True, it is a little too outspoken, there can be no doubt of that. Yet how grand it is, how splendid! With your permission, I will also quote you an extract from Rataziaev's story, Ermak and Zuleika." "You love me, Zuleika? Say again that you love me! You love me!" "I do love you, Ermak," whispered Zuleika. "Then by heaven and earth I thank you! By heaven and earth you have made me happy! You have given me all that my tortured soul has for immemorial years been seeking. 'Tis for this that you have led me hither, my guiding star. 'Tis for this that you have conducted me to the girdle of stone. To all the world will I now show my Zuleika, and no man, demon, or monster of hell shall bid me nay. Oh, if men would but understand the mysterious passions of her tender heart, and see the poem which lurks in each of her little tears! Suffer me to dry those tears with my kisses. Suffer me to drink of those heavenly drops. O being who art not of this earth!" "Ermak," said Zuleika, "the world is cruel, and men are unjust. But let them drive us from their midst. Let them judge us, my beloved Ermak. What has a poor maiden who was reared amid the snows of Siberia to do with their cold, icy, self-sufficient world? Men cannot understand me, my darling, my sweetheart. Is that so? Then shall the sword of the Cossacks sing and whistle over their heads," cried Ermak, with a furious look in his eyes. What must Ermak have felt when he learned that his Zuleika had been murdered, Barbara? That, taking advantage of the cover of night, the blind old Kuchum had, in Ermak's absence, broken into the latter's tent and stabbed his own daughter in mistake for the man who had robbed him of sceptre and crown. "Oh, that I had a stone whereon to whet my sword!" cried Ermak, in the madness of his wrath, as he strove to sharpen his steel blade upon the enchanted rock. "I would have his blood! His blood! I would tear him limb from limb, the villain!" Then Ermak, unable to survive the loss of his Zuleika, throws himself into the Irtish, and the tale comes to an end. Here, again, is another short extract, this time written in a more comical vein, to make people laugh. "Do you know Ivan Prokofievitch Zheltopuzh? He is the man who took a piece out of Prokofy Ivanovitch's leg. Ivan's character is one of the rugged order, and therefore one that is rather lacking in virtue. Yet he has a passionate relish for radishes and honey. Once he also possessed a friend named Pelagia Antonovna. Do you know Pelagia Antonovna? She is the woman who always puts on her petticoat wrong side outward. What humor, Barbara! What purest humor! We rocked with laughter when he read it aloud to us. Yes, that is the kind of man he is. Possibly the passage is a trifle over frolicsome, but at least it is harmless, and contains no free thought or liberal ideas. In passing, I may say that Rataziaev is not only a supreme writer, but also a man of upright life, which is more than can be said for most writers. What do you think, is an idea that sometimes enters my head. In fact, what if I myself were to write something? How if suddenly a book were to make its appearance in the world, bearing the title of "The Poetical Works of Makar Dievushkin"? What then, my angel? How should you view, should you receive such an event? I may say of myself that never, after my book had appeared, should I have the hardihood to show my face on the Nevsky Prospect. For would it not be too dreadful to hear every one saying, "Here comes the litterateur and poet, Dievushkin"? Yes, it is Dievushkin himself. What, in such a case, should I do with my feet? For I may tell you that almost always my shoes are patched, or have just been resoled, and therefore look anything but becoming. To think that the great writer Dievushkin should walk about in patched footgear! If a duchess or a countess should recognize me, what would she say, poor woman? Perhaps, though, she would not notice my shoes at all, since it may reasonably be supposed that countesses do not greatly occupy themselves with footgear, especially with the footgear of civil service officials. Footgear may differ from footgear, it must be remembered. Besides, I should find that the countess had heard all about me, for my friends would have betrayed me to her, Rataziaev among the first of them, seeing that he often goes to visit Countess V. and practically lives at her house. She is said to be a woman of great intellect and wit. An artful dog, that Rataziaev! But enough of this. I write this sort of thing both to amuse myself and to divert your thoughts. Goodbye now, my angel. This is a long epistle that I am sending you, but the reason is that today I feel in good spirits after dining at Rataziaev's. There I came across a novel which I hardly know how to describe to you. Do not think the worse of me on that account, even though I bring you another book instead, for I certainly mean to bring one. The novel in question was one of Paul de Kock's, and not a novel for you to read. No, no, such a work is unfit for your eyes. In fact, it is said to have greatly offended the cities of St. Petersburg. Also, I am sending you a pound of bonbons, bought specially for yourself. Each time that you eat one, beloved, remember the sender. Only do not bite the iced ones, but suck them gently, lest they make your teeth ache. Perhaps, too, you like comfits? Well, write and tell me if it is so. Goodbye, goodbye. Christ watch over you, my darling. Always your faithful friend, Makar Dievushkin. End of section 19.
Section 20 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 27th. My dearest Makar Alexievitch, Thedora tells me that, should I wish, there are some people who will be glad to help me by obtaining me an excellent post as governess in a certain house. What think you, my friend? Shall I go or not? Of course I should then cease to be a burden to you, and the post appears to be a comfortable one. On the other hand, the idea of entering a strange house appals me. The people in it are landed gentry, and they will begin to ask me questions, and to busy themselves about me. What answers shall I then return? You see, I am now so unused to society, so shy. I like to live in a corner to which I have long grown used. Yes, the place with which one is familiar is always the best. Even if for a companion one has but sorrow, that place will still be the best. God alone knows what duties the post will entail. Perhaps I shall merely be required to act as nursemaid. And in any case, I hear that the governess there has been changed 3 times in 2 years. For God's sake, Makar Alexievitch, advise me whether to go or not. Why do you never come near me now? Do let my eyes have an occasional sight of you. Mass on Sundays is almost the only time when we see one another. How retiring you have become! So also have I, even though, in a way, I am your kinswoman. You must have ceased to love me, Makar Alexievitch. I spend many a weary hour because of it. Sometimes, when dusk is falling, I find myself lonely, oh, so lonely! Thedora has gone out somewhere, and I sit here and think, and think, and think. I remember all the past, its joys and its sorrows. It passes before my eyes in detail, it glimmers at me as out of a mist, and as it does so, well-known faces appear, which seem actually to be present with me in this room. Most frequently of all, I see my mother. Ah, the dreams that come to me! I feel that my health is breaking, so weak am I. When this morning I arose, sickness took me until I vomited and vomited. Yes, I know that death is approaching. Who will bury me when it has come? Who will visit my tomb? Who will sorrow for me? And now it is in a strange place, in the house of a stranger, that I may have to die. Yes, in a corner which I do not know. My God, how sad a thing is life! Why do you send me comfits to eat? Whence do you get the money to buy them? Ah, for God's sake, keep the money, keep the money. Thedora has sold a carpet which I have made. She got 50 roubles for it, which is very good. I had expected less. Of the 50 roubles I shall give Thedora 3, and with the remainder make myself a plain warm dress. Also, I am going to make you a waistcoat, to make it myself, and out of good material. Also, Thedora has brought me a book, The Stories of Bielkin, which I will forward you, if you would care to read it. Only do not soil it, nor yet retain it, for it does not belong to me. It is by Pushkin. 2 years ago I read these stories with my mother, and it would hurt me to read them again. If you yourself have any books, pray let me have them, so long as they have not been obtained from Rataziaev. Probably he will be giving you one of his own works, when he has had one printed. How is it that his compositions please you so much, Makar Alexievitch? I think them such rubbish. Now good-bye. How I have been chattering on! When feeling sad, I always like to talk of something, for it acts upon me like medicine. I begin to feel easier as soon as I have uttered what is preying upon my heart. Good-bye, good-bye, my friend. Your own, B.D. End of section 20.
Section 21 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 28. My dearest Barbara Alexievna, away with melancholy! Oh, really, beloved, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. How can you allow such thoughts to enter your head? Really and truly, you are quite well. Oh, really and truly, you are, my darling. Why, you are blooming, simply blooming. True, I see a certain touch of pallor in your face, but still you are blooming. A fig for dreams and visions. Yes, for shame, dearest. Drive away those fancies. Try to despise them. Why do I sleep so well? Why am I never ailing? Look at me, beloved. I live well. I sleep peacefully. I retain my health. I can ruffle it with my juniors. In fact, it is a pleasure to see me. Come, come then, sweetheart. Let us have no more of this. I know that that little head of yours is capable of any fancy, that all too easily you take to dreaming and repining, but for my sake cease to do so. Are you to go to these people, you ask me? Never. No, no, again no. How could you think of doing such a thing as taking a journey? I will not allow it. I intend to combat your intention with all my might. I will sell my frock coat and walk the streets in my shirt sleeves, rather than let you be in want. But no, Barbara, I know you. I know you. This is merely a trick, merely a trick. And probably Thedora alone is to blame for it. She appears to be a foolish old woman, and to be able to persuade you to do anything. Do not believe her, my dearest. I am sure that you know what is what, as well as she does. Sweetheart? She is a stupid, quarrelsome, rubbish-talking old woman who brought her late husband to the grave. Probably she has been plaguing you as much as she did him. Oh, no, no, dearest, you must not take this step. What should I do then? What would there be left for me to do? Pray, put the idea out of your head. What is it you lack here? I cannot feel sufficiently overjoyed to be near you, while for your part you love me well, and can live your life here as quietly as you wish. Read or sew, whichever you like. Or read and do not sew. Only do not desert me. Try yourself to imagine how things would seem after you had gone. Here am I, sending you books, and later we will go for a walk. Oh, come, come then, my Barbara, summon to your aid your reason, and cease to babble of trifles. As soon as I can, I will come and see you, and then you shall tell me the whole story. Oh, this will not do, sweetheart. This certainly will not do. Of course, I know that I am not an educated man, and have received but a sorry schooling, and have had no inclination for it, and think too much of Rataziaev, if you will. But he is my friend, and therefore I must put in a word or two for him. Yes, he is a splendid writer. Again and again I assert that he writes magnificently. I do not agree with you about his works, and never shall. He writes too ornately, too laconically, with too great a wealth of imagery and imagination. Perhaps you have read him without insight, Barbara, or perhaps you were out of spirits at the time, or angry with Thedora about something, or worried about some mischance. Ah, but you should read him sympathetically, and best of all, at a time when you are feeling happy and contented and pleasantly disposed. For instance, when you have a bonbon or two in your mouth. Yes, that is the way to read Rataziaev. I do not dispute, indeed, who would do so, that better writers than he exist, even far better. But they are good, and he is good too. They write well, and he writes well. It is chiefly for his own sake that he writes, and he is to be approved for so doing. And now goodbye, dearest. More I cannot write, for I must hurry away to business. Be of good cheer, and the Lord God watch over you. Your faithful friend, Makar Dievushkin. P.S. Thank you so much for the book, darling. I will read it through this volume of Pushkin, and tonight come to you. End of section 21.
Section 22 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. June 28th. Part 2. My dear Makar Alexievitch, no, no, my friend. I must not go on living near you. I have been thinking the matter over, and come to the conclusion that I should be doing very wrong to refuse so good a post. I should at least have an assured crust of bread. I might at least set to work to earn my employer's favour, and even try to change my character if required to do so. Of course, it is a sad and sorry thing to have to live among strangers, and to be forced to seek their patronage, and to conceal and constrain one's own personality, but God will help me. I must not remain forever a recluse, for similar chances have come my way before. I remember how, when a little girl at school, I used to go home on Sundays and spend the time in frisking and dancing about. Sometimes my mother would chide me for so doing, but I did not care, for my heart was too joyous, and my spirits too buoyant for that. Yet, as the evening of Sunday came on, a sadness as of death would overtake me, for at 9 o'clock I had to return to school, where everything was cold and strange and severe, where the governesses on Mondays lost their tempers, and nipped my ears and made me cry. On such occasions I would retire to a corner and weep alone, concealing my tears lest I should be called lazy. Yet it was not because I had to study that I used to weep, and in time I grew more used to things, and after my school days were over, shed tears only when I was parting with friends. It is not right for me to live in dependence upon you. The thought tortures me. I tell you this frankly, for the reason that frankness with you has become a habit. Cannot I see that daily, at earliest dawn, Thedora rises to do washing and scrubbing, and remains working at it until late at night, even though her poor old bones must be aching for want of rest? Cannot I also see that you are ruining yourself for me, and hoarding your last kopeck that you may spend it on my behalf? You ought not so to act, my friend, even though you write that you would rather sell your all than let me want for anything. I believe in you, my friend. I entirely believe in your good heart, but you say that to me now, when perhaps you have received some unexpected sum or gratuity, and there is still the future to be thought of. You yourself know that I am always ailing, that I cannot work as you do, glad though I should be of any work if I could get it. So what else is there for me to do? To sit and repine as I watch you and Thedora? But how would that be of any use to you? Am I necessary to you, comrade of mine? Have I ever done you any good? Though I am bound to you with my whole soul, and love you dearly and strongly and whole-heartedly, a bitter fate has ordained that that love should be all that I have to give, that I should be unable, by creating for your subsistence, to repay you for all your kindness. Do not therefore detain me longer, but think the matter out, and give me your opinion on it, in expectation of which I remain, your sweetheart, B. D. End of section 22.
Section 23 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. July 1st. Oh, rubbish, rubbish, Barbara. Oh, what you say is sheer rubbish. Stay here, rather, and put such thoughts out of your head. None of what you suppose is true. I can see for myself that it is not. Whatsoever you lack here, you have but to ask me for it. Here you love and are loved, and we might easily be happy and contented together. What could you want more? What have you to do with strangers? You cannot possibly know what strangers are like. I know it, though, and could have told you if you had asked me. There is a stranger whom I know, and whose bread I have eaten. He is a cruel man, Barbara, a man so bad that he would be unworthy of your little heart, and would soon tear it to pieces with his railings and reproaches and black looks. On the other hand, you are safe and well here. You are as safe as though you were sheltered in a nest. Besides, you would, as it were, leave me with my head gone. For what should I have to do when you were gone? What could I, an old man, find to do? Are you not necessary to me? Are you not useful to me, eh? Surely you do not think that you are not useful? You are of great use to me, Barbara, for you exercise a beneficial influence upon my life. Even at this moment, as I think of you, I feel cheered, for always I can write letters to you, and put into them what I am feeling, and receive from you detailed answers. I have bought you a wardrobe, and also procured you a bonnet, so you see that you have only to give me a commission for it to be executed. No, in what way are you not useful? What should I do if I were deserted in my old age? What would become of me? Perhaps you never thought of that, Barbara. Perhaps you never said to yourself, how could he get on without me? You see, I have grown so accustomed to you. What else would it end in if you were to go away? Why, in my hiking to the Neva's bank and doing away with myself. Ah, Barbara, darling, I can see that you want me to be taken away to the Volkovo cemetery in a broken down old hearse, with some poor outcast of the streets to accompany my coffin as chief mourner, and the grave diggers to heap my body with clay and depart and leave me there. How wrong of you! How wrong of you, my beloved! Yes, by heavens, how wrong of you! I am returning you your book, little friend, and if you were to ask of me my opinion of it, I should say that never before in my life had I read a book so splendid. I keep wondering how I have hitherto contrived to remain such an owl. For what have I ever done? From what wilds did I spring into existence? I know nothing. I know simply nothing. My ignorance is complete. Frankly, I am not an educated man, for until now I have read scarcely a single book. Only A Portrait of Man, a clever enough work in its way. The Boy Who Could Play Many Tunes Upon Bells, and Ivik's Storks. That is all. But now I have also read The Station Overseer in your little volume, and it is wonderful to think that one may live and yet be ignorant of the fact that under one's very nose there may be a book in which one's whole life is described as in a picture. Never should I have guessed that, as soon as ever one begins to read such a book, it sets one on both to remember and to consider and to foretell events. Another reason why I like this book so much is that though, in the case of other works, however clever they be, one may read them, yet remember not a word of them, for I am a man naturally dull of comprehension, and unable to read works of any great importance, although, as I say, one may read such works, one reads such a book as yours, as easily as though it had been written by oneself, and had taken possession of one's heart, and turned it inside out for inspection, and were describing it in detail as a matter of perfect simplicity. Why, I might almost have written the book myself. Why not, indeed? I can feel just as the people in the book do, and find myself in positions precisely similar to those of, say, the character Samson Viren. In fact, how many good-hearted wretches like Viren are there not walking about amongst us? How easily, too, it is all described! I assure you, my darling, that I almost shed tears when I read that Viren so took to drink as to lose his memory, become morose, and spend whole days over his liquor, as also that he choked with grief and wept bitterly when, rubbing his eyes with his dirty hand, he bethought him of his wandering lamb, his daughter Tunasha. How natural! How natural! You should read the book for yourself. The thing is actually alive. Even I can see that. Even I can realize that it is a picture cut from the very life around me. In it I see our own Teresa, to go no further, and the poor chinovnik, who is just such a man as this Samson Viren, except for his surname of Gorshkov. The book describes just what might happen to ourselves, to myself in particular. Even a count who lives in the Nevsky Prospect or in Naberezhnaya Street might have a similar experience, though he might appear to be different, owing to the fact that his life is cast on a higher plane. Yes, just the same things might happen to him, just the same things. Here you are wishing to go away and leave us. Yet be careful lest it would not be I who had to pay the penalty of your doing so, for you might ruin both yourself and me. For the love of God, put away these thoughts from you, my darling, and do not torture me in vain. How could you, my poor little unfledged nestling, find yourself food, and defend yourself from misfortune, and ward off the wiles of evil men? Think better of it, Barbara, and pay no more heed to foolish advice and calumny, but read your book again, and read it with attention. It may do you much good. I have spoken of Ratashniev's The Station Overseer. However, the author has told me that the work is old-fashioned, since nowadays books are issued with illustrations and embellishments of different sorts, though I could not make out all that he said. Pushkin he adjudges a splendid poet, and one who has done honour to Holy Russia. Read your book again, Barbara, and follow my advice, and make an old man happy. The Lord God Himself will reward you. Yes, He will surely reward you. Your faithful friend, Makar. End of section 23.
Section 24 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. July 1st, Part 2. My dearest Makar Alexievitch, today Thedora came to me with 15 roubles in silver. How glad was the poor woman when I gave her 3 of them! I am writing to you in great haste, for I am busy cutting out a waistcoat to send to you, buff, with a pattern of flowers. Also, I am sending you a book of stories, some of which I have read myself, particularly one called The Cloak. You invite me to go to the theatre with you, but will it not cost too much? Of course we might sit in the gallery. It is a long time, indeed I cannot remember when I last did so, since I visited a theatre. Yet I cannot help fearing that such an amusement is beyond our means. Thedora keeps nodding her head, and saying that you have taken to living above your income. I myself divine the same thing by the amount which you have spent upon me. Take care, dear friend, that misfortune does not come of it, for Thedora has also informed me of certain rumours concerning your inability to meet your landlady's bills. In fact, I am very anxious about you. Now, good-bye, for I must hasten away to see about another matter, about the changing of the ribbons on my bonnet. P.S. Do you know, if we go to the theatre, I think that I shall wear my new hat and black mantilla. Will that not look nice? End of section 24.
Section 25 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. July 7. My dearest Barbara Alexievna, so much for yesterday. Yes, dearest, we have both been caught playing the fool, for I have become thoroughly bitten with the actress of whom I spoke. Last night I listened to her with all my ears, although, strangely enough, it was practically my first sight of her, seeing that only once before had I been to the theatre. In those days I lived cheek by jowl with a party of 5 young men, a most noisy crew, and one night I accompanied them willy-nilly to the theatre, though I held myself decently aloof from their doings, and only assisted them for company's sake. How those fellows talked to me of this actress! Every night, when the theatre was open, the entire band of them (they always seemed to possess the requisite money) would betake themselves to that place of entertainment, where they ascended to the gallery and clapped their hands, and repeatedly recalled the actress in question. In fact, they went simply mad over her. Even after we had returned home, they would give me no rest, but would go on talking about her all night, and calling her their Glasha, and declaring themselves to be in love with the canary bird of their hearts. My defenceless self, too, they would plague about the woman, for I was as young as they. What a figure I must have cut with them on the fourth tier of the gallery! Yet I never got a sight of more than just a corner of the curtain, but had to content myself with listening. She had a fine, resounding, mellow voice, like a nightingale's, and we all of us used to clap our hands loudly and to shout at the top of our lungs. In short, we came very near to being ejected. On the first occasion I went home walking as in a mist, with a single rouble left in my pocket, and an interval of 10 clear days confronting me before next payday. Yet what think you, dearest? The very next day, before going to work, I called at a French perfumer's, and spent my whole remaining capital on some eau de cologne and scented soap. Why I did so I do not know. Nor did I dine at home that day, but kept walking and walking past her windows. She lived in a fourth-story flat on the Nevsky Prospect. At length I returned to my own lodging, but only to rest a short hour before again setting up to the Nevsky Prospect and resuming my vigil before her windows. For a month and a half I kept this up, dangling in her train. Sometimes I would hire cabs, and discharge them in view of her abode, until at length I had entirely ruined myself and got into debt. Then I fell out of love with her. I grew weary of the pursuit. You see, therefore, to what depths an actress can reduce a decent man. In those days I was young. Yes, in those days I was very young. M.D. End of section 25. Section 26 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. July 8th. My dearest Barbara Alexievna, the book which I received from you on the 6th of this month I now hasten to return, while at the same time hastening also to explain matters to you in this accompanying letter. What a misfortune, my beloved, that you should have brought me to such a pass! Our lots in life are apportioned by the Almighty according to our human deserts. To such a one He assigns a life in a general's epaulettes, or as a privy councillor. To such a one, I say, He assigns a life of command, whereas to another one He allots only a life of unmurmuring toil and suffering. These things are calculated according to a man's capacity. One man may be capable of one thing, and another of another, and their several capacities are ordered by the Lord God Himself. I have now been 30 years in the public service, and have fulfilled my duties irreproachably, remained abstemious, and never been detected in any unbecoming behaviour. As a citizen, I may confess, I confess it freely, I have been guilty of certain shortcomings, yet those shortcomings have been combined with certain virtues. I am respected by my superiors, and even His Excellency has had no fault to find with me. And though I have never been shown any special marks of favour, I know that every one finds me at least satisfactory. Also, my writing is sufficiently legible and clear. Neither too rounded nor too fine, it is a running hand, yet always suitable. Of our staff, only Ivan Prokofievitch writes a similar hand. Thus have I lived till the grey hairs of my old age, yet I can think of no serious fault committed. Of course, no one is free from minor faults. Every one has some of them, and you among the rest, my beloved. But in grave or in audacious offences never have I been detected, nor in infringements of regulations, nor in breaches of the public peace. No, never. This you surely know, even as the author of your book must have known it. Yes, he also must have known it when he sat down to write. I had not expected this of you, my Barbara. I should never have expected it. What? In future, I am not to go on living peacefully in my little corner, poor though that corner be. I am not to go on living, as the proverb has it, without muddying the water, or hurting any one, or forgetting the fear of the Lord God and of oneself. I am not to see, forsooth, that no man does me an injury, or breaks into my home. I am not to take care that all shall go well with me, or that I have clothes to wear, or that my shoes do not require mending, or that I be given work to do, or that I possess sufficient meat and drink. Is it nothing that where the pavement is rotten I have to walk on tiptoe to save my boots? If I write to you overmuch concerning myself, is it concerning another man rather that I ought to write? Concerning his wants, concerning his lack of tea to drink, and all the world needs tea. Has it ever been my custom to pry into other men's mouths to see what is being put into them? Have I ever been known to offend any one in that respect? No, no, beloved. Why should I desire to insult other folks when they are not molesting me? Let me give you an example of what I mean. A man may go on slaving and slaving in the public service, and earn the respect of his superiors for what it is worth, and then, for no visible reason at all, find himself made a fool of. Of course, he may break out now and then. I am not now referring only to drunkenness, and, for example, buy himself a new pair of shoes, and take pleasure in seeing his feet looking well and smartly shod. Yes, I myself have known what it is to feel like that. I write this in good faith. Yet I am none the less astonished that Fyodor Theodorovitch should neglect what is being said about him, and take no steps to defend himself. True, he is only a subordinate official, and sometimes loves to rate and scold, yet why should he not do so? Why should he not indulge in a little vituperation when he feels like it? Suppose it to be necessary for form's sake to scold, and to set every one right, and to shower around abuse, for between ourselves, Barbara, our friend cannot get on without abuse, so much so that every one humours him and does things behind his back. Well, since officials differ in rank, and every official demands that he shall be allowed to abuse his fellow officials in proportion to his rank, it follows that the tone also of official abuse should become divided into ranks, and thus accord with the natural order of things. All the world is built upon the system that each one of us shall have to yield precedence to some other one, as well as to enjoy a certain power of abusing his fellows. Without such a provision, the world could not get on at all, and simple chaos would ensue. Yet I am surprised that our Theodore should continue to overlook insults of the kind that he endures. Why do I do my official work at all? Why is that necessary? Will my doing of it lead anyone who reads it to give me a greatcoat, or to buy me a new pair of shoes? No, Barbara. Men only read the documents, and then require me to write more. Sometimes a man will hide himself away, and not show his face abroad, for the mere reason that, though he has done nothing to be ashamed of, he dreads the gossip and slandering which are everywhere to be encountered. If his civic and family life have to do with literature, everything will be printed and read and laughed over and discussed, until at length he hardly dares show his face in the street at all, seeing that he will have been described by report as recognizable to his gait alone. Then, when he has amended his ways and grown gentler, even though he still continues to be loaded with official work, he will come to be accounted a virtuous, decent citizen who has deserved well of his comrades, rendered obedience to his superiors, wished no one any evil, preserved the fear of God in his heart, and died lamented. Yet would it not be better, instead of letting the poor fellow die, to give him a cloak while yet he is alive, to give it to the same Fyodor Theodorovitch, that is to say, to myself? Yes, 'twere far better if, on hearing the tale of his subordinate's virtues, the chief of the department were to call the deserving man into his office, and then and there to promote him, and to grant him an increase of salary. Thus vice would be punished, virtue would prevail, and the staff of that department would live in peace together. Here we have an example from everyday commonplace life. How, therefore, could you bring yourself to send me that book, my beloved? It is a badly conceived work, Barbara, and also unreal, for the reason that in creation such a tchinovnik does not exist. No, again I protest against it, little Barbara. Again I protest. Your most humble, devoted servant, M.D. End of section 26.
Section 27 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. July 27th. My dearest Makar Alexievitch, your latest conduct and letters had frightened me, and left me thunderstruck and plunged in doubt, until what you have said about Thedor explained the situation. Why despair and go into such frenzies, Makar Alexievitch? Your explanations only partially satisfy me. Perhaps I did wrong to insist upon accepting a good situation when it was offered me, seeing that from my last experience in that way I derived a shock which was anything but a matter for jesting. You say also that your love for me has compelled you to hide yourself in retirement. Now, how much I am indebted to you I realized when you told me that you were spending for my benefit the sum which you are always reported to have laid by at your banker's. But now that I have learned that you never possessed such a fund, but that, on hearing of my destitute plight, and being moved by it, you decided to spend upon me the whole of your salary, even to forestall it, and when I had fallen ill, actually to sell your clothes, when I learned all this, I found myself placed in the harassing position of not knowing how to accept it all, nor what to think of it. Ah, Makar Alexievitch, you ought to have stopped at your first acts of charity, acts inspired by sympathy and the love of kinsfolk, rather than have continued to squander your means upon what was unnecessary. Yes, you have betrayed our friendship, Makar Alexievitch, in that you have not been open with me. And now that I see that your last coin has been spent upon dresses and bonbons, and excursions and books and visits to the theatre for me, I weep bitter tears for my unpardonable improvidence in having accepted these things, without giving so much as a thought to your welfare. Yes, all that you have done to give me pleasure has become converted into a source of grief, and left behind it only useless regret. Of late I have remarked that you were looking depressed, and though I felt fearful that something unfortunate was impending, what has happened would otherwise never have entered my head. To think that your better sense should so play you false, Makar Alexievitch! What will people think of you, and say of you? Who will want to know you? You, whom like every one else I have valued for your goodness of heart and modesty and good sense, you, I say, have now given way to an unpleasant vice of which you seem never before to have been guilty. What were my feelings when Thedora informed me that you had been discovered drunk in the street, and taken home by the police. Why, I felt petrified with astonishment, although in view of the fact that you had failed me for 4 days, I had been expecting some such extraordinary occurrence. Also, have you thought what your superiors will say of you when they come to learn the true reason of your absence? You say that everyone is laughing at you, that everyone has learned of the bond which exists between us, and that your neighbors habitually refer to me with a sneer. Pay no attention to this, Makar Alexievitch. For the love of God, be comforted. Also, the incident between you and the officers has much alarmed me, although I had heard certain rumors concerning it. Pray explain to me what it means. You write, too, that you have been afraid to be open with me, for the reason that your confessions might lose you my friendship. Also, you say that you are in despair at the thought of being unable to help me in my illness, owing to the fact that you have sold everything which might have maintained me and preserved me in sickness, as well as that you have borrowed as much as it is possible for you to borrow, and are daily experiencing unpleasantness with your landlady. Well, in failing to reveal all this to me, you chose the worse course. Now, however, I know all. You have forced me to recognize that I have been the cause of your unhappy plight, as well as that my own conduct has brought upon myself a twofold measure of sorrow. The fact leaves me thunderstruck, Makar Alexievitch. Ah, friend, an infectious disease is indeed a misfortune, for now we poor and miserable folk must perforce keep apart from one another, lest the infection be increased. Yes, I have brought upon you calamities which never before in your humble solitary life you had experienced. This tortures and exhausts me more than I can tell to think of. Write to me quite frankly. Tell me how you came to embark upon such a course of conduct. Comfort, oh comfort me if you can. It is not self-love that prompts me to speak of my own comforting, but my friendship and love for you, which will never fade from my heart. Goodbye. I await your answer with impatience. You have thought but poorly of me, Makar Alexievitch. Your friend and lover, Barbara Dabroslova. End of section 27.
Section 28 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. July 28th. My priceless Barbara Alexievna, what am I to say to you now that all is over, and we are gradually returning to our old position? You say that you are anxious as to what will be thought of me. Oh, let me tell you that the dearest thing in life to me is my self-respect. Wherefore, in informing you of my misfortunes and misconduct, I would add that none of my superiors know of my doings, nor ever will know of them, and that therefore I still enjoy a measure of respect in that quarter. Only one thing do I fear. I fear gossip. Garrulous though my landlady be, she said but little when, with the aid of your 10 roubles, I today paid her part of her account. And as for the rest of my companions, they do not matter at all. So long as I have not borrowed money from them, I need pay them no attention. To conclude my explanations, let me tell you that I value your respect for me above everything in the world, and have found it my greatest comfort during this temporary distress of mine. Thank God, the first shock of things has abated, now that you have agreed not to look upon me as faithless and an egotist, simply because I have deceived you. I wish to hold you to myself, for the reason that I cannot bear to part with you, and love you as my guardian angel. I have now returned to work, and am applying myself diligently to my duties. Also, yesterday, Evstafi Ivanovitch exchanged a word or two with me. Yet I will not conceal from you the fact that my debts are crushing me down, and that my wardrobe is in a sorry state. At the same time, these things do not really matter, and I would bid you not despair about them. Send me, however, another half‐rouble if you can, though that half‐rouble will stab me to the heart, stab me with the thought that it is not I who am helping you, but you who are helping me. Thedora has done well to get those 15 roubles for you. At the moment, fool of an old man that I am, I have no hope of acquiring any more money, but as soon as ever I do so, I will write to you and let you know all about it. What chiefly worries me is the fear of gossip. Goodbye, little angel. I kiss your hands and beseech you to regain your health. If this is not a detailed letter, the reason is that I must soon be starting for the office, in order that, by strict application to duty, I may make amends for the past. Further information concerning my doings, as well as concerning that affair with the officers, must be deferred until tonight. Your affectionate and respectful friend, Makar Dievushkin. End of section 28. Section 29 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Addison. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. July 28th. Dearest little Barbara, it is you who have committed a fault, and one which must weigh heavily upon your conscience. Indeed, your last letter has amazed and confounded me, so much so that, on once more looking into the recesses of my heart, I perceived that I was perfectly right in what I did. Of course, I am not now referring to my debauch. Oh, no, indeed, but to the fact that I love you, and to the fact that it is unwise of me to love you, very unwise. You know not how matters stand, my darling. You know not why I am bound to love you. Otherwise you would not say all that you do. Yet I am persuaded that it is your head rather than your heart that is speaking. I am certain that your heart thinks very differently. What occurred that night between myself and those officers, I scarcely know, I scarcely remember. You must bear in mind that for some time past I have been in terrible distress, that for a whole month I have been, so to speak, hanging by a single thread. Indeed, my position has been most pitiable. Though I hid myself from you, my landlady was for ever shouting and railing at me. This would not have mattered a jot. The horrible old woman might have shouted as much as she pleased, had it not been that, in the first place, there was the disgrace of it, and in the second place, she had somehow learned of our connection, and kept proclaiming it to the household, until I felt perfectly deafened, and had to stop my ears. The point, however, is that other people did not stop their ears, but, on the contrary, pricked them. Indeed, I am at a loss what to do. Oh, really, this wretched rabble has driven me to extremities. It all began with my hearing a strange rumour from Thedora, namely, that an unworthy suitor had been to visit you, and had insulted you with an improper proposal. That he had insulted you deeply I knew from my own feelings, for I felt insulted in an equal degree. Upon that, my angel, I went to pieces, and losing all self-control, plunged headlong. Bursting into an unspeakable frenzy, I was at once going to call upon this villain of a seducer, though what to do next I knew not, seeing that I was fearful of giving you offence. Oh, what a night of sorrow it was, and what a time of gloom, rain, and sleet! Next, I was returning home, but found myself unable to stand upon my feet. Then Emelia Ilyitch happened to come by. He also is a tchinovnik, or rather was a tchinovnik, since he was turned out of the service some time ago. What he was doing there at that moment I do not know. I only know that I went with him. Surely it cannot give you pleasure to read of the misfortunes of your friend, of his sorrows, and of the temptations which he experienced. On the evening of the third day, Emelia urged me to go and see the officer of whom I have spoken, and whose address I had learned from our dvornik. More strictly speaking, I had noticed him when, on a previous occasion, he had come to play cards here, and I had followed him home. Of course I now see that I did wrong, but I felt beside myself when I heard them telling him stories about me. Exactly what happened next I cannot remember. I only remember that several other officers were present, as well as he. Or it may be that I saw everything double. God alone knows. Also, I cannot exactly remember what I said. I only remember that in my fury I said a great deal. Then they turned me out of the room and threw me down the staircase, pushed me down it, that is to say. How I got home, you know. That is all. Of course, later I blamed myself, and my pride underwent a fall. But no extraneous person, except yourself, knows of the affair, and in any case it does not matter. Perhaps the affair is as you imagine it to have been, Barbara. One thing I know for certain, and that is that last year one of our lodgers, Aksenti Osipovitch, took a similar liberty with Peter Petrovitch, yet kept the fact secret, an absolute secret. He called him into his room. I happened to be looking through a crack in the partition wall, and had an explanation with him in the way that a gentleman should, no one except myself being a witness of the scene, whereas in my own case I had no explanation at all. After the scene was over, nothing further transpired between Aksenti Osipovitch and Peter Petrovitch, for the reason that the latter was so desirous of getting on in life that he held his tongue. As a result, they bow and shake hands whenever they meet. I will not dispute the fact that I have erred most grievously, that I should never dare to dispute, or that I have fallen greatly in my own estimation. But I think I was fated from birth so to do, and one cannot escape fate, my beloved. Here, therefore, is a detailed explanation of my misfortunes and sorrows, written for you to read whenever you may find it convenient. I am far from well, beloved, and have lost all my gaiety of disposition, but I send you this letter as a token of my love, devotion, and respect. Oh, dear lady of my affections, your humble servant, Makar Dievushkin. End of section 29.
Section 30 of Poor Folk. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Charles James Hogarth. July 29th. My dearest Makar Alexievitch, I have read your 2 letters, and they make my heart ache. See here, dear friend of mine. You pass over certain things in silence, and write about a portion only of your misfortunes. Can it be that the letters are the outcome of a mental disorder? Come and see me, for God's sake. Come to-day, direct from the office, and dine with us, as you have done before. As to how you are living now, or as to what settlement you have made with your landlady, I know not, for you write nothing concerning those 2 points, and seem purposely to have left them unmentioned. Au revoir, my friend. Come to me to-day without fail. You would do better always to dine here. Thedora is an excellent cook. Good-bye. Your own, Barbara Dabroslava. End of Section 30.